Still waiting for Andy McCormick. I assume that we're expecting Councillor McCormick tonight. We've had no notification. I'm going to have to crack on at in a minute anyway. Right, it's 6:30 and I should commence this meeting of the Development Control Committee in virtual session. For the benefit of the members of the public watching or participating in this meeting, I shall explain who everyone is. My name is Councillor Paul Miller and I'm the chairman of the committee. The committee meeting is being held virtually in accordance with the council's rules for virtual meetings, which reflect the published government regulations implementing the Coronavirus Act. The meeting is being streamed live on YouTube and will also be available to view after the meeting is finished. Councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications before us are identified by name on the screen. Ward councillors addressing the committee will be introduced by name. Can I ask the officers who will be advising the committee to introduce themselves and their role?
Good evening, Chair. Mike Townsend, Planning and Development Manager.
Evening, Lucy Page, Principal Planning Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Philip Richards, Senior Planning Officer.
Gemma Cox, Senior Planning Officer.
Anne Greaves, Legal Services Manager.
Bernadette, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. The Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be assessing the material brought before us and listening to the representations made, and will make decisions based on planning reasons. In reaching these decisions, we are guided by national and local planning policy and guidance. I understand that planning decisions can be emotive, and I ask that everybody remains polite and professional and patient throughout this meeting in case of any slight delay in presentations. Can I now remind both members and officers of the procedures we'll be using as this meeting is virtual. Unless speaking, officers will have their videos switched off to provide clarity as to who the committee members are for those watching and participating. At this point, can I ask all officers present to switch off their video? The officers present will only switch their video link on during the item that they are presenting or where they wish to be invited to speak by me as chair. For this virtual meeting, councillors should observe the normal rules of behaviour under the Member Code of Conduct and ensure that they are not disturbed during this meeting. Would members ensure that their mobile phones are switched off or on silent? Can members of the committee turn on their video link during the meeting and keep their microphones muted unless they've been invited to speak by the chair? Members are reminded that if they switch off their video link or move away from the camera, they will be treated as leaving the meeting and will not be able to take part in any vote on the item under discussion. Members can indicate their wish to speak by raising their hand and should only speak when I, as chair, invite them to do so. When we move into debate of the applications, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition and to keep their comments on each agenda item to a maximum of 4 minutes. As chair, I will confirm the name of any visiting speaker at the appropriate time in the agenda before they address the committee by audio link. Councillors should state if they have any declaration of interest or if they have predetermined an item on the agenda that they are leaving the meeting and switch off the video link. They can then switch on their video link again and rejoin when I call the next agenda item. Where a member of the committee has a predetermined position on an application and has registered to speak under the public speaking scheme, they will stand down from the meeting and will only be able to participate as a visiting councillor by audio link. They will then rejoin the meeting as a member of the committee once that application has been determined. At the appropriate time, I would invite speakers to contribute to the meeting by audio link in the order set out in the update paper, and I reserve the right to reorder the speaking in the event that technical difficulties occur. I would ask each speaker to confirm their name and interest in the item before commencing their contribution. I would ask that points made by visiting speakers are material planning considerations only relating to facts. May I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to keep points made on the application to material reasons only. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning is finished. All speakers will be reminded of their permitted speaking time and will be advised when they have 1 minute remaining. Voting will be taken by roll call, and I will confirm the recommendation that is to be voted upon before the voting begins. When each member unmutes their microphone to vote, can they leave a small pause before speaking to allow their vote to be heard? And also, can each member then indicate whether they are for the recommendation, against, or whether they wish to abstain? Hopefully we will not have any IT problems, but can I remind councillors that if their connection is lost, that they should immediately advise the Democratic Support Officer and use their meeting link to access the meeting once again. Right, we'll just move on now to the main agenda. And before I run through agenda item number 1, just one thing I'd like to bring to the committee's attention is that after we go through agenda item number 5, there will be 2 more actions that we need to, and decisions that we need to adopt as a committee under agenda item 6, removal of a section 106 obligation, and agenda item number 7, the removal of a section 52 obligation. And we'll go into the details of those at the time. Apologies for absence and substitutions. What I've been notified of is, unfortunately, Councillor David Leakes, a member of the committee, he woke up this morning and he found he was profoundly deaf. He's seeking medical attention, and I sent a message to wish him well. There is no substitute for Councillor Leakes this evening, and I've been notified that Councillor Robinson is absent and Councillor Saunders is the substitute on the committee tonight. Do I have any other announcements for absence or substitutions? There are none. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor David George.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, I was going to speak just to the ward council on item 3, but I do believe it's possibly been withdrawn from tonight's agenda. If that is correct, obviously I won't be able to speak anyway or participate anyway in item 3, but if it's still on the agenda, I would like to speak as ward councillor. Thank you.
Right. Well, okay, I'll come on to that in a minute. No more declarations of interest. Then I'll go on to, there are no urgent matters, agenda item number 3. Now, minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of July and the 12th of August. Before I move any of the recommendation that they be signed, I'd like to bring Mike Townsend in on this, as he has an announcement to be made, as I think it was on, I'm sure it was on the minutes of the 12th of August. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This was just in relation to the minutes for the meeting on the 12th of August. As you say, if I can refer members to page 86 of the agenda related to item 11 of that agenda, which, as members may recall, was an application for a variation of legal agreement at Chapel Hill with regards to open space, etc. The minor alteration that we'd be seeking to make is that after where it says that the committee resolved to, there should have been some wording around effectively the final wording being delegated to officers to resolve that part. So, Chair, my suggestion would be that it would, instead of just simply saying resolve to, it would instead say resolve that it be delegated to the planning and development manager in consultation with legal services, the final wording of the reason for refusal pursuant to the first bullet point below, expressing why the requirement continues to serve a useful purpose. And that then would ensure that delegation is in place, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. And members, that has been entered, that form of words has been entered in after consultation with legal. So with that slight amendment in wording, I now move those minutes of the 22nd of July and the 12th of August for approval, unless anybody else has got any comment as a matter of accuracy within those minutes. Councillor David Potter.
Only on the matter that Mike Townsend's just raised. I mean, I, for one, certainly didn't take down what he said. Can I just clarify how that's actually then going to be published so that we can read it again, and the revised form of minutes, when will they be available? It's quite a significant item to some people, I think. That's my question, if I may.
Of course. Anne Greaves may want to come in on this as well. I think effectively the wording would be recorded in written form prior to the chair signing the minutes. But I can appreciate it was a sensitive issue. It was effectively just to record the fact that I think the discussion at the meeting was that the final wording of the reason for refusal that would go out on the decision notice was to be delegated to officers effectively. But the principle of it, I think, was that first bullet point that the committee rejected the request to allow a private management company to maintain public open space above the car park, which I think was the key part, as I understood the committee's resolution. It was simply I suppose the technicality that the final wording, detailed wording around how that would be crafted was then delegated to officers. But as I say, Anne Greaves may want to say something on that as well.
Chair, that's right. It should actually read equally useful purpose. And of course, the minutes will be available on the website if any member wants to check them subsequently. They're put up with all the agendas after the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful. I'll make a point of telling others who you might guess will be interested in that point. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Bernie.
Sorry, just to confirm, the draft minutes won't be amended. What will happen is the minutes that for this meeting, under that section, it will confirm the amendment on the 12th of August.
Oh.
So the draft minutes that are already published won't be amended. It will just confirm in this set of minutes when you confirm them, if that makes sense, Councillor.
Yeah. I've got a request then back to Mike. because of the sensitivity of this particular agenda item, may I ask that all the committee are circulated a form of words by email to make sure, and give us 48 hours just to give a tick in the box. If anybody wants to comment upon them, they have 48 hours to come back through you for that amendment to the decision notice to take place. But as Bernie said, these will stay as they are. They won't be amended.
Yeah, again, I think I'd have to defer to Anne in terms of the procedure.
Yes, that's fine.
But I think, yeah, certainly as Bernadette has suggested, I think the minutes would be, for this meeting would then be out, at which point there would be that ability to comment on that. But effectively is just to capture, I think, what was agreed at the meeting.
Exactly. And I fully appreciate Councillor Potter's remark, because there's a much wider audience that are very keen to see what that wording happens to be. But the essence, I think, has been caught in that first bullet point. The rest of it's a matter of procedure. Okay. No other comments on the minutes. Fine, I will be signing those in due course. I think all the chairs, and especially me, will have an awful lot of signing to do eventually. Right, we'll go on to item number 5, applications. And at this point, I will announce that the item number 3 under agenda item number 5 has been withdrawn. It's been withdrawn because of a discrepancy. There's in fact conflict of data within what has been presented within the application and other correspondence, and in fact what has been built, what is in the built form currently. There's different discrepancies in measurements, and it would be counterproductive to bring it before the committee tonight without the proper data. There's a conflict 3 ways on this, so that will be brought to probably the next DC meeting. So agenda item number 3, to be clear, is land at the rear of the Harroway, Evangel Road, Whitchurch, has been withdrawn. So we will proceed with item number 1, land to the west of 41 Main Road, Tadley. And if I could have Mr. Gillespie ready to speak, and if he would just hold fire, and I will get the officers, Philip Richards, to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 1 can be found on page 99 of tonight's agenda, and it's for the erection of 2 2-bedroom dwellings and 2 3-bedroom dwellings for older persons independent living, to include associated landscaping and works at land to the west of 41 Main Road in Tadley. If I could draw members' attention to the update paper. Following the publication of the officer's report, there was a further letter of objection received, which has been summarised as follows. And then following that, some officers' remarks to address the points raised. Also, just by way of a verbal update, the pre-commencement conditions have been agreed by the agent, and there was a note in the back part of the report outlining the pre-commencement conditions, and they have been agreed by the agent. The application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed at the end of the officer's report, which starts on page 118. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gillespie, you have 4 minutes starting now.
Good evening, and thank you very much for allowing me to address your committee. I'm a chartered town planner and I represent the applicant. The application has been the subject of extensive detailed consideration, negotiation and adjustment following submission well over a year ago in June 2019. As your authority is currently unable to identify a minimum 5 years supply of housing land, this proposal must be considered in accordance with national policy and the presumption or tilted balance in favour of sustainable development applied. As confirmed within your officer's report, this application may only be refused if the development would lead to adverse impacts which would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against national policy. So that's the test which you're expected to apply. Your officers concluded, however, that there is no such demonstrable evidence of adverse impacts and hence their recommendations. In terms of need, the demographics of the population is leading to increased attention being focused upon addressing the needs of the ageing population. Now, this is not simply about housing, it's also about mental health, and in particular increased longevity, loneliness, and the increasing costs associated with support from welfare services. This proposal has been designed to respond to a locally identified need for older persons housing. The planning statement which accompanied the application referred to the fact that the ONS identified an increase of almost 30,000 people falling into the age groups over those of 65 years of age between 2011 and 2040 in your borough, and that represents an increase of 151%. Furthermore, your authority's SHMA 2015 identified a 43% rise in the need for older persons accessible housing by 2029. Now, these people are already living within your community. They're not moving into the borough, they're already here. They are, for instance, already registered with local GPs. This can also assist in addressing under-occupancy, and under-occupancy of larger unsuitable family homes represents a rate of 75% within the borough, and that again comes from the SHMA. Now, not everyone, as research advisors, wants to move to a flat in a town or city centre, and evidence demonstrates that many will continue to stay within less than suitable family homes until finally forced through probably ill health to move. Now, this is unsatisfactory. And so continued occupation of family housing is unnecessarily expensive and of course denies that family housing to those who really ought to be living in the houses designed for that purpose. The scheme will help to begin to address this growing need. Condition 17 of your officer's recommendations will ensure that the proposal will only be occupied by persons aged 55 and over, their dependent relatives, etc. Those over 55 include people approaching or already in retirement as anticipated within national policy. That policy does not simply seek such accommodation for the elderly, but persons generally from 55 years of age and over.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. This includes active older persons who wish to remain independent within their own social networks and local to where they are. Such accommodation, therefore, may well provide for working from home in a spare bedroom used as a small office. Such accommodation also will need to provide for guests or indeed a carer should that become necessary later on. And that explains the number of bedrooms that we're proposing in this scheme. The single-storey scale will not be out of keeping with the surroundings. It has been designed to resemble, say, a converted stable block or farmyard buildings, and we believe that's sympathetic with the site's edge of settlement location. The scale of the scheme is modest and will provide a valuable form of accommodation to meet an increasing need for older persons housing. There is no substantive evidence of adverse impact, which demonstrably outweighs the benefits in permitting this scheme. The tilted balance in favour of development is applied and permission should be granted. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gillespie. Members, do you have any questions for the speaker? Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Can I draw members' attention, Mr. Gillespie, to condition number 6 on page 100. The proposed development can provide a means to ensure that the needs of the inhabitants of the development can be accommodated in the event of an emergency. What are those means, please?
That's been the subject of your consultation with the emergency planning officer, I believe, who has no objection to this. And as far as I'm aware, it would be no different to any other accommodation within the vicinity of this part of the town. I'm not aware of any extra special arrangements that are necessary in support of the application. Certainly in our discussions with the officers, they were satisfied that adequate provision could be made for evacuation if there became a real emergency through contact. But as a condition suggests, we could examine a way of means of communication if that would assist members.
Yes, go on, Councillor Brown.
Just, I mean, this is the first time I've ever seen that sort of wording in one of these documents, and it does specifically say a means to ensure the needs of the inhabitants. And I couldn't see anything in the report that referred to that. That was all.
No, Councillor, I rather suspect that's a means of communication and advance notice of or notice of the need to evacuate. I'm perfectly happy to explore that with the officers in the revised wording of condition. We can certainly respond to that.
And Councillor Bound, may I suggest that when we come on in a minute to questions to officers, maybe you get a clarification there from the case officer. Okay, any more questions for the applicant? Yes, Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good evening, Mr. Gillespie. Just a matter of clarification, if you would. You said these are older persons living, housing, whatever. I just noticed you've got a first floor plan, so 2 of the units have got bedrooms upstairs. Is there, I can't see from our plans that we have here, are there bedrooms downstairs, the 3rd bedroom, or is it all upstairs?
No, there are bedrooms downstairs. The upstairs accommodation is normally provided for guests or a carer, and that's why that extra accommodation is provided in attic form.
Okay, thank you very much.
No more questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Gillespie.
Thank you.
Now, members, questions to officers. Can I take it, Councillor Bound, you'd like the officers to comment on your last question
Yes,
to the applicant?
Yes, please.
Right, Philip.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just bringing up the comments of the emergency planners. I was just wondering if Councillor Bound could refer to the page again. I think you mentioned page 100 on the agenda.
I think, yes, I think he was looking, not a condition, but the reason for approval number
Right.
6 on page
Sorry,
100, because
Yeah.
I did the same thing. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
It was a question of looking at that reason for approval and relationship to the report.
Yes, okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think that was sort of derived from the correspondence with the emergency planners, and I think as the agent suggested, I think the means to ensure the needs of inhabitants is referring to, yes, falling into that emergency plan by way of the usual procedures in terms of first contact and communication, and I think by sheltering and then, yes, following the if there is an emergency evacuation, that they would fall within the emergency plan. I mean, I'm not sure if my colleagues have anything further to add on that point, but it was sort of taken from the wording as established by the consultation response from the emergency planners on that one.
Mike?
I
Sorry,
was thinking.
Mike Towns. Sorry, other Mike. Mike Towns.
I was going to say, Chair, if Councillor Bound has a follow-up, I could probably wrap those two up at the same time. So is it possible to take Councillor Bound's follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Councillor Bound.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because they're there for sort of the more elderly part of the population, this accommodation, I've never seen that sort of wording in a reason for approval. Normally they've been quite the opposite, in fact. So I was just wondering how this is going to be accommodated.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think it's just simply down to the conclusion of the emergency planners that on this occasion that the existing plan can accommodate it, and I think that's partly due to the location of the site. So it's I think the report quotes 1,600 metres from the boundary fence, so it's on the sort of outer limits, if you like, of that DPZ, where the sort of pressure, I suppose, that it poses on the emergency plan changes, and I think that's the way that the emergency planners know and I have suggested this policy would operate. You know, the closer you are to the boundary fence of AWE and the greater the proportion of development, the more likely that there'd be an advise against. But where it's on the sort of outer extremities of the area, I think they can come to the conclusion that it can be accommodated. And I think that's what we tried to capture in the reason for approval on this occasion.
Thank you, Mike.
Any more questions to officers? No debate. Councillor Potter, followed by McCormick and Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Simply, I mean, as usual, a well-constructed report, which I think contains all of the elements that we need to make an effective decision on this. I mean, it's never pleasant, I have to say, to be reminded that this council doesn't have 5 years land supply or deliverable sites available over that 5-year period, but that's the fact, and that imposes considerable obligations on us as a local authority. But all that apart, I mean, I think this is a commendable scheme in its own right. I like much of what I've read about it. I like much of what I've seen in terms of the layout and the composition of the units, and I do genuinely believe that it will satisfy a local need. And I think the concept of more elderly people moving out of accommodation, probably not entirely suitable for them, into something more suitable, freeing up another residential dwelling somewhere else, is commendable. And on that basis, I certainly have no hesitation in supporting the officer's recommendation for this application to be approved, Chair.
Thanks very much. Can I take that as you're moving this for the approval?
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second. I actually had a bit of a drive-by viewing of this because I go up Main Road most days when I'm going into the office. Yeah, I think this, on balance, whatever is detrimental is not outweighing the benefits, so we should approve.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I would have seconded Councillor Bosser if Councillor McCormick hadn't done it. I mean, I think conditions 11, 15, 18, 19 and 20, which refer to mitigation for biodiversity, landscape and trees, is to be welcomed, because that was something which was perhaps part of the main objections to this development.
Thank you very much. It's been properly moved and seconded for approval, and I'll go through a roll call committee, and I'll start with Councillor Court. For or against?
For approval.
Councillor Leeks is not here. Councillor Saunders?
For.
Councillor Goodison?
For.
Councillor George?
For.
Councillor Frankham?
For.
Councillor Grant?
For.
Councillor McCormick?
For.
Councillor Lovegrove? Councillor Lovegrove. Maybe I missed him as being absent. Okay. And Councillor Posner?
For.
And Councillor Tomlin?
For.
Thank you very much, committee. And sorry?
It's not Councillor Lovegrove tonight, it's Councillor Bound.
Okay, it's that's me, because he replaced you last time, and it's still on my list of councillors. But thank you very much for reminding me. It's
I am for.
And you're for. Thank you. Registered. That is approved. Officers?
That's for, sorry, 10 for the recommendation.
Conditions?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the application has been approved, subject to the condition listed at the end of tonight's report, which can start and can be found on page 118 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on to item number 2, and would Ms. Berry please check in, please?
Hello.
Good evening, and if you could just hold tight a minute while the officers introduce the application of Hillside Farm and Over Road Highclere.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Item 2 seeks planning permission for land raising and re-landscaping works for the creation of a horse grazing area. The application is part retrospective in that some material has already been imported to the site to create a new land gradient. The application proposals seek in part to regularise parts of the previously undertaken infill, and in addition seeks to level out the existing land to the east. The proposals before the Development Control Committee comprise the re-levelling of the site to create a plateau which will extend eastwards to meet an existing bund which lies between the application site and stable buildings beyond. When compared with the original land levels prior to the importation of any material, the proposal would result in a maximum increase in land levels by approximately 1.5 metres. It's important to note that the application is not for a change of use of the land, as the lawful use for the site is for mixed agriculture and for the keeping of horses. If I could please draw members' attention to the update paper. Since the publication of the agenda, details have been submitted to address condition 3. The details submitted comprise of wildflower seed mix, comprising of 80% grass and 20% wildflowers. And they also did detail the necessary ground preparation works to establish for successful establishment of that planting and a long-term maintenance programme. The landscape officer has had a chance to review that detail and considers them to be acceptable. So within the update paper, it's recommended that condition 3 is amended to secure that the development is carried out in accordance with those details. In addition to that, and unfortunately not included within the update paper, a construction method statement to address condition 4 has also now been submitted. And the highways officer has reviewed that as well and considered that that detail is acceptable. So I would also verbally recommend that condition 4 is amended to secure that the development is carried out in accordance with the now submitted construction method statement. The application is before Development Control Committee this evening due to the number of objections received and the officer's recommendation for approval. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Gemma. Right, Ms. Berry, you have 4 minutes to address the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak in support of the application this evening. I am an associate planner at Redden Agricultural Consultants and I'm acting agent on this application. Of course, the officer report recommends approval and it considers that the proposal doesn't have any significant impacts on the quality of the appearance of the landscape and AONB, highways impact or any negative impact upon key species. The current proposal before you is actually the result of several reiterations of the original scheme and negotiations with the officer, and we've also submitted at the request of the council several supporting documents which consultees seem to be acceptable of. So when complete, the development will actually improve the appearance of the immediate area and result in a biodiversity net gain. To give you a bit of background as to why we're at this point we are now, in 2005, landscaping works associated with an approval of planning consent for a new building to house chickens had begun to be implemented at Hillside Farm. That work and the need for the approved building ceased when the business fell into financial difficulty. Subsequently, the applicant concentrated efforts on diversifying the business and now operates a successful delivery yard from the site. Unfortunately, as details transpired, she didn't get around to finishing the landscaping work at Hillside Farm, and therefore the land since that point had steeped slopely into the surrounding landscape. So last year, a local contractor offered the applicant the opportunity to complete the landscaping work to allow her to create a usable grazing area and improve the appearance of the land, which is something she was really, really keen to do. So she put her faith in this contractor and she made no financial gain through the import of any material to the site. In fact, it cost her to do so. And following the involvement of the council last year, she's been unable to contact this contractor and has now engaged another individual who's been carrying out a laborious process of separating construction material deposited on the site without her consent. At the request of the Environment Agency. Any work on site to remove this was actually ceased at the request of the council last year. Several reiterations, as I said earlier, of this proposal have been submitted over the course of the application, and the current proposal actually requires the removal of several hundred cubic metres of material from the site. The remedial works and the completion of the scheme are actually going to have significant financial implications for the applicant, and although it's not a planning consideration, I think it demonstrates a commitment to improving the appearance of the site. Several letters of objection were received to the council from neighbours in respect of the current proposal, and those have already been addressed by the officer and in the officer's report. During the course of the application, a number of complaints were also made to the council as waste was being separated from the material at the request of the EA. This wasn't actually any unauthorised activity, it was simply a response of the applicant to carry out, to comply with the request of the Environment Agency.
You have just under a minute. Okay,
thank you. There were reports of additional material being brought to site. However, what actually happened was that material was moved from one part of site to another, rather than material being brought in. So there was actually no breach there. And whether or not planning permission is granted today, it still remains for the applicant to comply with the requirements of the EA, and some construction material will have to be removed from the site, and which actually equates to the same amount, approximately the same amount as what we're proposing to remove anyway. The majority of the statutory consultees are acceptable of the scheme, with the exception of the AOMB team, who haven't confirmed the removal of their objection. However, their original response was in line with that of the landscape officer, who is now satisfied with the proposal. As the officer,
if I could ask you to wind up, please.
Details have been submitted for construction method statement and landscaping works, and the overall proposal will improve the appearance of the site and the character of the AOMB. And I request that the committee approve the application in line with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. Members, any questions to the applicant? Councillor Bound.
Good evening, Ms. Berry. For clarification, the report on page 141 talks about 315 cubic metres of material will now be removed. Is this the material that you are talking about, of the 4,123 that was imported and you didn't know where it came from?
Well, the Environment Agency will have been given tickets to clarify the origin of the material, so they will have some idea of where it came from. But yes, the material that was imported, this 315 cubic meters, is removal of some of that. Yes.
Yes, go on, Mike.
Can I just come back to that?
Yeah, sure.
It would appear that over 4,000 was imported, but you're just removing 315. Is that right?
Yes, we have this 315 is actually a significant difference to what was originally proposed. The original scheme we submitted involved the importation of quite a lot of material, so this is a significant reduction when compared to that original scheme. Through the several iterations of the proposal, it's gradually got less and less and less, to the point where we're removing material from the site now.
I think, Chair, I'm going to have to ask the officer, because I'm still not too clear of this.
Yes, I understand, because there doesn't seem to be a synergy in the figures here. Yeah, we'll address that with the officers. Couldn't agree more. Anybody else for the applicant? No, thank you very much, Ms. Berry. Right, questions to officers, and we'll kick off with Councillor Bound's question, I think, followed by George and Sanders.
Do you want me to repeat it, Chair?
Well, Gemma, did you gather what Councillor Bound was asking?
The total amount of material that has been imported to date equates to 4,123 cubic meters. To achieve the gradient that is currently proposed, that will require the removal of 315 cubic meters of that 421.
4,000.
Yeah, 4,000 already imported. The application, as it was initially submitted, included it was retrospective, so for all of the material previously imported, so the 4,123 cubic meters and additional material, several iterations have subsequently reduced the amount of additional material needed to achieve the attended gradient. And so now the proposals involve 3,808 cubic meters of material above what was there originally to achieve the gradient. Does that answer your question, Councillor Bound?
Yes, it does, Gemma. Could I ask also, has this material then been laid on the site already, or is it in a big pile?
It a lot of the material that's already been deposited is more kind of located towards the western edge of the site, but the intended gradient would actually require some of the redistribution of that material to come further down towards the east to kind of create more of a flatter plateau to make it more suitable for the grazing of horses.
Sorry, and finally, will that be tested then before it's distributed across the site, or will the site be tested only when that is done?
Do you mean in terms of contamination? Sorry, Councillor.
Yes.
Yeah, so the relevant condition, let me just find it within the agenda. So condition 6 and 7 on the agenda require that contamination reports be completed and submitted to the local planning authority prior to the use of the occupation for the grazing of horses, but they would be permitted to actually redistribute the land by the wording of that condition. It's not a pre-commencement condition, but that's in line with the recommendations of the environmental health officer.
Okay. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I was very interested in reading through here that, what was it, a comment on page 135, the Environment Agency do not wish to be consulted on this particular application. I'm just interested in that particular wording. I don't think I've ever seen it before. I did look in the documents, the supporting documents, there's no land quality statement, and it does seem to be indicated that the 315 meters that is going to be removed, cubic meters that is going to be removed, has been at the bequest of the Environment Agency. So is there information here that we're not seeing in terms of land quality? Has land quality assessments already been done on this and looked at the material? And is this the 315 meters that they do not deem to be suitable to have been deposited on the site? That's my first question. I would like a second, if I may, as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the Environment Agency only want to be consulted on applications of a certain size and a certain scale, and this application fell below that threshold, which is why we got that response back from them. So they didn't want to comment on the application, and I would like to point out that that was even after I went back to the Environment Agency with the specific details of this application, with making them aware of the fact that material had been imported. So we didn't receive any comments from them in that respect. In terms of the quantity of material that the Environment Agency have requested be removed, that's information that's come to light as a result of the enforcement investigations that Ms Berry was talking about at the beginning. So that information is obviously reliant on information that's been gathered through the enforcement team, that is the quantity that the Environment Agency has required to be removed.
And your second point, Councillor George?
Well, again, I would like to very much pick up, I think, on the point that Councillor Bound made, looking at condition 6. Clearly, on the assumption, or we have no indication that the material on site has been tested. There's no information on that. We don't know what is there. And on the assumption that basically all this material, 4,000 cubic meters, is of unknown or possibly suspect quality. I don't know. We've got to assume that, I guess. We've got a duty to do that. It would, in my review, be very, very important that we test this before it started to be moved around the site, or we start creating dust. You know, I don't know, we can speculate here. There's maybe asbestos in this material that could get airborne. There could be all sorts of contaminants. And the last thing you want to do is actually start moving this around the site and flat it around and mixing it before you start testing it. That would seem to be a little roundabout, basically. So could I, has it been considered that basically this is a commencement condition rather than before you start using it? Because that would seem much more sensible from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the environmental health officer did make comments on the application following a site visit, so they have like visually checked over what's been going on at the site as well. They did suggest within their comments that the condition would be suitably worded to be prior to the use commencing or the occupation of the site. But if members did consider that it would be more appropriate for that to be pre-commencement, then that could be taken forward. All that would then need is the following: any resolution, any pre-commencement condition would need to be agreed with the applicant prior to a decision being made. So that part would need to be delegated back to officers.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Saunders. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute, Councillor George. Councillor Saunders.
There we go. Well, we may not be moving away from it, Chair, because I'm still confused on this issue. 4,000 litres, tonnes, whatever it is, of material is a lot of earth, or whatever it happens to be. And my understanding is you can't move that sort of quantity around without there being environmental agency approval, and there are tickets for it. So how is it that we don't know where this has come from? Why is there no trace that officers have been able to find through the EA of where this stuff has come from? And therefore, can the EA not just give us some satisfaction that this material is adequate? I mean, I do agree with the point that it should not be moved around without us being certain that the moving of it is not a dangerous thing to be doing. And the only way you can do that is to test it, but without looking at the site and seeing how far they've spread already the imported material, it's difficult to know what the right practical way forward on that is. But I do think that as it is written in the conditions at the moment, it's a bit wishy-washy. It's a bit sort of, you know, after the horse has bolted job here. If I was a neighbour living close by there, and the prospect that I have clouds of asbestos or whatever it might be wafting up the valley towards me will be a little bit of a concern. I'm not suggesting that is what that is, but at least we should have taken care to ensure that those kind of tests were made.
And the specific question, Councillor Saunders, to the officers.
Why don't we know from the EA
Fine.
what the source of this material was?
Thank you.
Look, I think ultimately, because the Environment Agency hasn't wanted to liaise with us directly on the application, because they haven't wanted to comment on the proposals in any event. My understanding is that the majority of the material that has been imported was subject to the relevant tickets and certificates, but there is some material that's exceeded those certificates, which is why the Environment Agency has required the removal of some of that material, and that is currently, as Miss Berry was saying, within her 4 minutes. That process of trying to identify that material and get it piled up and separated from the rest is currently ongoing.
Okay, Councillor.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take it in debate, but I don't feel we're actually doing our job properly on this one. I think we also have to weigh that up against the nature of the application. So I'll come back to it in debate if I may.
Yes, sure. Okay. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, it's just listening to the debate, the question, sorry, and just to add to Gemma's points already raised. I think that the key issue here is there's two different consenting regimes that have been referenced. Obviously, the role of the planning authority is to consider the application to the development. So in this case, the engineering operation of having the land formed and moved. I think in some ways the reference to the EA permitting information in the report is contextual. It isn't actually before this planning authority, if you like, to consider those points. It was just simply trying to explain the amounts of earth and material that were going to be moved. And as Gemma explained, it started with a proposal for even more material to come in. But as a result of the issues around the actual development, so the form of the land, landscape impact, etc., it's actually resulted in a proposal to remove more earth than what's already been brought in. I think in relation to the, if I may say, just on the point around the condition, looking at condition 6, as Gemma's reported, the Environmental Health Officer is clearly stated it not as a pre-commencement condition, but it is within the committee's remit, if there is that concern, to make it a pre-commencement condition. And the normal way that condition would work is that there would be some initial analysis that would be done prior to anything further happening on site, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor. Yeah, we'll take it on in debate. I've got a question on this one. I'm not leaving condition 6 alone, and reading the words in there, bearing in mind what Mike has just said, it says at the bottom of page 144, this must be conducted in accordance with the DEFRA and the Environmental Agency's model procedures for the management of land contamination. Now, I'm assuming there's a methodology whereby those two organizations have got together and produced this model procedures, which specifically goes into the examination for contamination. And the whole of this condition 6, as has been said, the environmental officer has been careful in his wordings, has included that because they recognize, I believe, in that wording, that they try to avoid the risk of any contamination within that soil material or whatever it happens to be. I'll go back to Gemma. And am I correct in my commentary on that, Gemma?
That's certainly my understanding of it. So I would agree with you there.
Okay, I was just trying to get this around in my own head. So, you know, just reading that carefully and listening to the questions just now. That's where I've arrived at anyway. Right, are there any more questions to officers at the moment? Okay, we'll open up debate, and I'll be a little flexible here. That if some other questions come up, we can bring the officers in to get better explanations. So we'll start with Councillor Saunders, George. Anybody else at the moment? Start off with Councillor Saunders, George, McCormack and Bound.
Thank you, Chair. To take up the point that Mike was making a little, not Mike Bound, Mike Townsend was making a little earlier on. I think on planning terms, this is a perfectly reasonable application and one which I will be quite happy to support in terms of what it does to the landscape, where it is, and how it would actually lead, I think, to an improvement in the landscape compared with what there is at the moment. My concern comes back to this issue of the potential contamination of the land. And I would very much like to see some resolution of that issue. And I don't know what that is because I'm not a specialist in this area, but some resolution of that issue being a precondition, not of the occupancy of the land, but of before any earth is moved, because we are talking about here land which is fairly low lying. It's not that far from a part of the area down there which floods on a fairly regular basis. And the thought of water going through contaminated land and then carrying the contaminant on further down would be a worry if that were the case. But with that proviso, I'd be quite happy to support this application, and to, if you like, I will move it on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll note that. Councillor George.
very much as I think Councillor Saunders said, I think we have to treat this very much as not just potentially contaminated land, but I think there's pro forma evidence to suggest that contaminated materials potentially have been on the site, and therefore not to have a precondition in there to assess it before the material is dealt with would be a dereliction of our duties. So I agree entirely, and I see no other problem, so I'd be happy to second Mr. Saunders' proposal on that basis.
Thank you very much. I'm going to carry on with this debate. Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Most of what I wanted to say has been said already. I think if we can address the concerns of contamination, I'm happy to support it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, likewise, but I'm still a little bit unhappy about condition 6, where it says, last but one paragraph, if during any works contamination is encountered which has not been previously identified. Who's going to identify it, for goodness sake, without testing? So that's why I think there should be pre-commencement testing. And I won't vote for this unless there is some sort of precondition.
Yes, I'm getting the sense that the committee is heading in that direction. And I was going to ask you to come forward, Mike, to ask your advice on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just
sorry, Mike Townsend.
just very briefly. Yeah, I mean, certainly condition 6 can be changed to pre-commencement. That would require delegation for us to then agree that with the applicant. So that would be wrapped up within the resolution. Picking up on Councillor Bound's point, I think the that third paragraph, the way that condition works for contaminated land is that it is a sort of a graded one. So it's requiring an investigation report initially, then the detailed remedial scheme. That sort of third paragraph, if you like, is a safety net, effectively to try and ensure that if something was then encountered beyond that during the actual development then happening, then there's still an ability to do that. Then there's the sort of catch-all beyond that is then condition 7, which is the verification report, which needs to come in at the end. So there's a stepped process, and effectively that would be the way in securing the committee's or addressing the committee's concerns, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor George.
Could I thank you? Just thank you for the thoughts on that. But having reread item number 6 or condition number 6, I'm just wondering whether we ought to include the scope of this particular condition. This one is very much to ground conditions, and it's clear. You can even see if you look at the site on Google, it's not ground, it's just piles of waste. So I think if we are going to have a condition in there, it's not just the ground that we need to test, it is actually the waste itself, which is deposited on the ground. Maybe I'm being a bit pedantic, but I think it would be very useful to have that included.
So I particularly identify it's to do with the imported materials.
Sorry, it certainly should be the imported materials, but also include 1 or 2 test places, because often you get contamination which is washed through the materials, and then it gets basically, I won't go into the technical details, but it gets absorbed onto clay particles in the soil, particularly metals and things like that. So it's important to test the ground beneath it as well.
Mike Townsend, I think I don't want to start wordsmithing this, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just very briefly, I think the way that we capture that would simply be to say that it'd be a pre-commencement condition, and that would reference ground conditions and for clarity to include any existing imported material.
Fine. With that proviso, it's been moved and seconded for approval. And I'll quickly go through the roll call. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
Against.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you, members. Officers.
That's 9 for the recommendation and 1 against.
That's fine. And conditions with that proviso, Gemma.
Thank you. So the application has been approved, subject to amended condition 3, requiring development to be carried out in accordance with the submitted seed mix. Also amendments to condition 4 in relation to the construction method statement submitted as verbally updated at the beginning of the item, and also amendments to condition 6 and 7 to pre-commencement conditions, subject to the agreement with the applicant, to include contamination reports for ground, documenting the ground conditions, to include the imported existing waste material to the site.
Right. Thank you very much. We move on now to item number 4, item number 3 having been withdrawn, which is land at West Bridge, Highclere. And if I could ask Mr. Bond to check in, please.
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear, Mr.
Lovely,
Bond. If you'd
thank
just like to hang fire, we'll introduce the application and I'll call you in a second.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. So this item seeks outline planning permission for the demolition of the existing buildings and the redevelopment of the site to provide 4 dwellings comprising of 1 5-bed and 3 3-bedroom dwellings, together with modified access at Westridge in Highclere. The site is situated within the North Wessex Down area of outstanding natural beauty. The application has been submitted in outline form only, with only access to be considered at this stage. Matters of appearance, landscaping, layout and scale would be considered by the subsequent reserved matters applications. The illustrative layout plan on page 203 of the agenda is therefore for illustrative purposes only. The application site is a former piggery comprising of a number of disused and derelict agricultural buildings and hard standing, and the site also consists of a number of trees and undergrowth. If I could please draw members' attention to the update paper. Members will note that page 184 of the main agenda incorrectly refers to policy CN1 when it should refer to policy CN3 under the section housing mix. To clarify, it's not necessary for affordable housing provision to be sought in relation to this development. Since the publication of the agenda, we have received further correspondence on behalf of the applicant in the attempt to justify the proposed housing mix, and the officer's comments in light of that correspondence is detailed within the update paper. But just to summarise, the officer's assessment remains as set out within the agenda, within the main agenda report. In addition, an amended visibility sightline plan has been received, and the Highways Authority have confirmed that it's acceptable, and that plan demonstrates visibility displays of 2.4 metres by 43 metres to the west and 2.4 metres by 34 metres to the east. Accordingly, it, as set out in the update, is advised that condition 17 is amended to secure that the visibility displays are provided in accordance with that amended drawing. Also, just to confirm, the provision of those visibility displays would not result in the removal of any additional trees not already indicated for removal within the submitted application. The application has been brought to the Development Control Committee due to the number of objections received and the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bound, you have 4 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair. So my name is Douglas Bond of Wolf Bond Planning. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant in support of the application. As you've heard, members, this is a small-scale redevelopment scheme of an unattractive and derelict site that lies adjacent to several residential properties. The site serves little positive purpose or function. Your local plan policy does allow for small-scale redevelopment schemes within the countryside up to 4 dwellings, and clearly the scale of this scheme respects that limit. The landscape officer raises no objections and concludes that the proposal, which is half the density of the neighbouring residential development, will not result in any significant adverse impact on the AONB. The scheme will include a 6-metre wide landscape buffer on its left-hand or western side, as you see, and is closely related to the existing edge of the village that lies to the northeast, east and south. Your planning and landscape officers agree that the proposal is acceptable. The proposal therefore accords with your landscape policy EM1 and delivering high quality development policy EM10. The officers conclude that the site can be redeveloped with satisfactory relationships with neighbouring residential properties. The proposal accords with the council's numerical housing mix as set out in the housing SPD. The issue of mix is also informed by the size, location, density and character of the site and surrounding area. As the officer's report confirms, the proposal is acceptable in respect of these character matters too. Accordingly, the proposed mix should be seen to be acceptable. You've heard, and the report also confirms that the council has a 5-year housing land supply deficit. As a result, the tilted planning balance is engaged. Owing to the acceptable landscape impact, a net biodiversity gain in excess of 10%, no objections in respect of highways from the County Council, no objections in relation to trees or the historic environment, the proposal is consistent with all other policies. In these terms, and consistent with the comprehensive and well-structured officers' report before you, the proposal has significant merit, accords with all relevant policies of the NPPF, and therefore can be approved. Conditions are in place to safeguard a number of important considerations relating to trees, highways, and retention of the on-site timber-clad granary. So to sum up, members, the proposal represents a small-scale and sensitive redevelopment scheme of an unattractive brownfield site without harm to the OMB countryside, the neighbouring residential environment, or the character of the area. Accordingly, the application can be supported consistent with the officer recommendation for approval. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Members, any questions to the applicant? Councillor Bound.
In light of the officer report concerning housing mix, did you ever consider, for instance, 3 3s and 2 2s on the site?
We felt, sir, that the proposed mix was more reflective of the character of the immediate residential environment. So from a character perspective, the suggested mix will seem to be more compatible with that character, and therefore as encouraged by your development plan policies, a proposal that is very much more attuned to the character of the local built environment. So we felt what's before you as a mix would be more appropriate in that sense, rather than a more intensive number of smaller units.
Thank you.
Any more questions for the applicant? None. Thank you very much, Mr. Bond.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, sir.
Thank you. Any questions to officers, please, members? Councillor Bound.
Just in relation again to the, sorry, in relation to the housing. Can I carry on? So
yes.
In relation to the housing mix, I mean, the report is quite unequivocal, really, in that it doesn't agree with the housing mix. I just wondered, not too much weight then has been given to it. Was it suggested to the applicant that maybe 3 3s and 2 2s would have been a better mix, especially in light of the needs of the area?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I did have conversations with the agent in relation to the housing mix. And typically also within outline applications, the mix isn't specified, so it's normally a consideration left for reserved matters. But because it has been specified, I did have detailed conversations with the agent in that respect. I think it's important to note that justification has been submitted to some extent. So they do, obviously, as Mr. Bound has also pointed out, the justification that they have submitted suggests that the mix is appropriate in terms of the physical characteristics of the surrounding area, but officers just felt that there was some lacking justification in terms of community context and housing need, which is why that conflict was given limited weight, because some justification was provided that did seem sensible, but just in line with subtext to policy CN3, it felt that justification didn't go all of the way.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. Just on one issue, on page 191, top of the page, other matters. Basically, you're saying that the Highclere neighbourhood plan has no weight in decision-making process. I did check. In fact, there is a submission document already being made in November 2019. And according to legislation that's on the books, it does give it some weight. You know, it may be only moderate or limited weight, but it does give it some weight. So do you think the officers have been incorrect in saying it has no weight whatsoever?
Sorry, I might need my policy to just step in there. That was my understanding at the time of the submission of the application. I don't know whether Mike or Lucy have anything different to add.
Mike.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I think the context of no weight is probably particularly in relation to the context that we're in at the minute, with the lack of 5-year supply in particular as well. So I think, you know, on that basis, the weight that you attribute to is highly limited. I think in terms of the no weight, I tend to agree. It probably isn't quite correct there, but I think it is highly limited, and I don't think it would be material to the outcome of this application, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Is that okay, Councillor George? You're muted.
Yes, sorry, yes, Chair. I understand maybe, but clearly there are other policies other than the housing supply within the neighbourhood plans, and just to dismiss it on the basis of 5-year, I wouldn't accept that. I don't think, you know, I might agree it's low to moderate weight, but I think it should be given some recognition, given that it's actually been submitted. So,
yeah, I think Mike Townsend did explain. He said probably no weight was very little. Read it as very little. Yeah. Any more questions to officers? No debate. Councillor Potter.
I was trying to ask a question, if I might. I mean, if you'd indulge me,
Yeah.
I just wanted to return, if I may, just come back. A question of Gemma in regard to the housing mix, which I know Councillor Bound raised. It just seems to me, I wasn't quite sure what Mr. Bond meant, and perhaps I could have asked him more about when he referred to the character of the area regarding, you know, the type of proposal they're making and a 5-bedroom unit being contained within this proposal. I mean, clearly the village design statement, which we would normally put some emphasis on, I think, really is looking for smaller units. And to be frank, I would have thought this was an ideal opportunity to provide such things. I know this is only an outline application, but it doesn't comply in that regard with CN1, and it's an important policy to us in most situations. I just want to ask Gemma how we make the balance on recommending this for approval when we clearly have an application that doesn't comply with the key policy CM1 and doesn't really coincide with a village decide statement. It makes me wonder just what priority we should be giving to that, please.
Thank you, Councillor. You referred to policy CN1 there, but I believe you were referring to policy CN3, just for clarification, in relation to housing mix. The assessment is that, given the weighing everything together, all of the merits of the proposal, is that yes, there is some conflict with policy CN3 that's been identified, but in the overall planning balance, the benefits of the scheme would still outweigh that conflict, given the current position of the council's inability to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, in acknowledging that the mix might not necessarily be in accordance with policy CN3, but the proposal would still nevertheless contribute housing at a time where the council is lacking in a 5-year housing land supply.
Councillor
Okay.
Potter, do you want to come
Yeah,
back?
no. I mean, I understand the nuance of that, Chair. Thank you. I'm obliged. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Now we'll jump into debate, and anybody for debate? Councillor Saunders.
The problem with Highclere is everybody thinks it's a very rich area, and it is a rich area, and there are a lot of big houses. What there are not very many of are small houses. Yet there are quite a lot of people who, like myself, are gradually maturing nicely and may well be seeking smaller accommodation, but still want to live within the radius where all their support network that they built up over years exists. And I would have been much happier with this if we'd seen maybe a 4-bedroomed and a mixture of 2- and 3-bedroom houses rather than the 3-bedroom ones, because the 3-bedroom, I mean, 3 bedrooms, we're talking about, depending on the size, and we obviously don't know what the size of these things are at the moment. They may be actually 2 bedrooms and a box room, or they may be 3 full bedrooms. 3 full bedrooms, you're talking about 300,000 to 400,000 minimum as a house price in Highclere. So it's not exactly the type of accommodation which is going to really, or potentially might lend itself to people downsizing or to getting a decent mix of accommodation in the area. So I am concerned that we're in danger of building another sort of middle-class ghetto here, rather than something which is a mix of different types of accommodation and a much more mixed environment. And there is actually within Highclere a very good example of where that was done, with a series of terrace houses fronting onto, I think they were 4-bedroom houses, but down a little close, and it's worked incredibly well. And this is the opportunity to do exactly that.
Anybody else? No, Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. I'll move the recommendation.
Do I have a seconder? I'll motion if Councillor George. Councillor George?
Yes, I'll second the motion.
You'll second the motion, okay. Councillor Banda, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think I agree with Councillor Saunders here. I can't go along with this recommendation as it stands, because I think the Councillor Saunders obviously knows the area, John Site, better than I do, but he's put into words what he feels about the housing mix in relation to the area and the needs of the area. And I don't think this meets the needs of the area even from what I've read in the report. So I can't go along with this report as it stands and go with approval.
Right, I've got a question for officers before we take this vote. It's been moved and seconded. Either Mike or Gemma, is the housing mix before us this evening?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the housing mix is before you because the application specifically sets out in the description 1 times 5 bed and 3 times 3 bed dwellings. So it is a firm proposal within the application. I do understand the points that members are raising on housing mix, and I think that's why it's been reported entirely clearly that there is some conflict with the housing mix policy. I think the reason why it's stated in that form is that simply it's not a case where it's, if you like, entirely contrary to. It's not one where all 4, for example, have come through as 5-bedroom dwellings. So there is a mix of sorts, and that's why it's stated in that way. Chair, I appreciate you've got a motion and seconder for approval, but I think, I suppose simply put, anything in terms of the weight that could be applied to housing mix as a reason for refusal. I think given that paragraph 11 the NPPF is engaged and it would be necessary to demonstrate that there was adverse impacts that are not outweighed by the benefits, I think wouldn't be substantiated at appeal in this situation, Chair. I do understand the points being raised, but I think because it is that contrary to a point, it's not something that would necessarily be substantiated as a reason for refusal in this context.
Thank you. I'm going to proceed with the vote on this. Been moved and seconded for approval. So, for or against or abstain, Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
Against.
Councillor Goodison. Councillor Goodison. You're muted, Sven.
Yeah, 4, sorry.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
4.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Thank you. Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
Against.
Councillor Potter.
Well, heeding Mike Townsend's advice, I'm voting for.
Councillor Tomlin.
Against.
Thank you. Officers.
I have 7 for the recommendation and 3 against.
Thank you. Conditions.
Thank you. And the application has been approved in accordance with the conditions as per the agenda, with the amendment to condition 17 as set out in the update paper, just amending the visibility sightline drawing.
Thank you very much. And we move on to item number 5. And if I could ask Mr. Lassiter to check in, please.
Good evening, Councillor.
Good evening, Mr. Lassiter. I trust you all well.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Just like to hang on, we'll introduce the application to land adjoining Miller's Cottage.
Thank you. This is an application for 1 2-bedroom dwelling with car parking and cycle shed, and the rearrangement of parking for 1 to 4 Miller's cottages, which are an existing row of terrace cottages. The application does have an update in relation to one of the pre-commencement conditions. There was an update on the date the notice was served and agreed by the agent, and also some additional wording on condition 15. It's been slightly altered, and condition 15 relates to the TPO'd trees. These have been replanted following some removal of TPO'd trees back in 2018 and 2019. And has followed extensive dialogue between the tree officer, the applicant and the agent. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Mr. Lassiter, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't need 4 minutes this evening. I commend your officer's report and the recommendation to grant permission for the addition of a 2-bed cottage on the end of the existing terrace. I did raise concerns about one of the preconditions suggested, but I'm pleased that the officers have agreed to appropriate amendments. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lassiter. Members, any questions for the agent, for the applicant? No? Well, thank you for pitching in, Mr. Lassiter, but no questions for you. And goodbye. Right, questions to officers. Are there any? No questions to officers. Debate? If nobody wants to kick it off, I'll move the recommendation from the chair. Do I have a seconder? I have a seconder of Councillor McCormick. I will run through the roll call. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Saunders,
For.
Councillor Goodison,
For.
Councillor George,
For.
Councillor Frankham,
For.
Councillor Grant,
For.
Councillor McCormick,
For.
and Councillor Bound,
For.
Councillor Potter,
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you, officers.
I have 10 for the recommendation.
Thank you, officers. Conditions.
Thank you. This application is thereby approved subject to conditions and set out in the main agenda report and the update to condition 15, the amended condition 15. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, move on to item number 6, and I call Miss Licorice, please. Miss Licorice, are you there?
Chair, she hasn't joined the meeting yet.
Right, I'll continue then. Mr. Randall.
Good evening. Yes, hello, Nick Randall here.
Hello, Mr. Randall. If you'd just like to hang on, we'll get the officers to introduce the application and I'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Officers.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6 seeks planning permission for the erection of a 1.5 metre high close boarded fence inside the boundary line of the A343, including entrance gates, at the siting of 2 recently constructed dwellings, Grantham House and Crawley House in Highclere. The existing fence erected along the western edge of the site does not form part of this application. The existing fence is unauthorised in that it has been erected without the benefit of planning permission and in contravention of the approved landscaping scheme for the construction of the 2 dwellings on the site. The proposed fence subject to this application would be sited back within the site when compared with the existing unauthorised fence by approximately 1.3 to 2.7 metres, and it would be sited approximately 0.8 metres away from the highway boundary. The current fence that is erected does encroach onto the highway. The application site is located within the North Wessex Down area of outstanding natural beauty, and there is no update. But for the benefit of the committee, where the update reads granted under the recommendation, please read this, that the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Mr. Randall, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much and good evening, everybody. I'm speaking obviously in support of this application and addressing the committee on behalf of myself, the owner of Grantham House, and my neighbours, the owners of Crawley House. I'd like to thank the case officer for their help and assistance with this application and the process, which was a little bit long-winded for us. This application requests the erection of a close-board fence further away from the highway boundary with the existing gates and with a planting scheme in front of the fence that will over time quickly obscure the harshness of a new fence as it matures, whilst again not obstructing any views to the land behind. We have worked with the highways and the environmental health, the landscape and biodiversity teams to address any concerns during this process that they had, and they have no objections now to this proposed development. I think the key benefits are that it retains the existing gates, so there's a minimal impact on the environment there. The fence position will be further away from the highway, not obstructing any users of that highway. The planting scheme is of a mixed native species type, higher than initially requested by development and landscape, of between 1.2 and 1.5 metres initial height, so that it will reduce the impact quite quickly as it grows. We will therefore not cause any loss of privacy or noise to our neighbours, and we will comply with the conditions as stipulated at the end of the report as well. So thank you very much for your time this evening, and obviously I support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And members, any questions to the applicant? No, thank you very much, Mr. Randall.
Thank you.
Could I ask if Miss Licorice is here, please?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Good evening to you. And you if you're ready, you have 4 minutes to address the committee.
I do, thank you. Good evening. My name is Katie Licorice. I live at the Red House, directly opposite the site of this application, with my husband and 2 children. I'm here today to speak on behalf of my family, other neighbours, and the Highclere Society, which represents over 300 members in our village. We all object to this retrospective application. The erection of this high post-board fencing and gates along the full length of these 2 properties, coupled with the removal of the hedgerow behind it, are direct and deliberate breaches of the clear conditions set out in the appeal decision letter issued by Inspector Joanne Jones on the 11th of February 2015. She expressly stated that there should be no gates to the highway and that only hedging and trees should form the boundary in order to preserve the rural character of this area of outstanding natural beauty and to maintain views through to the countryside beyond. In short, her conditions were imposed on the original planning permission precisely to prevent what we find ourselves confronted with here and now. Introduction of the fencing and gates is also in direct conflict with the recommendations of Highclere's village design statement, which specifies the continued use of natural hedging to surround properties in order to maintain the rural feel of our village. Furthermore, fencing, because it is close-board in style, is acting as a significant amplifier of traffic noise, which now bounces back across the road at an unacceptable, disturbing level for both our business and home. I am concerned that the boundary fence noise assessment conducted on the 17th of July 2020, carried out by Clark Saunders, company instructed by Chris Anderson of TN Development. Surely the assessment should have been undertaken by an independent and neutral company that does not have a vested interest in approving this application. At no point have Clark Saunders approached us to take current traffic decibel readings from inside our home and business. Instead, we have relied on externally gathered data from 2015. I therefore find their assessment biased and incomplete. In conclusion, allowing this retrospective application to be approved would make a complete mockery of the planning permission system. It is thumbing a nose at the inspector and her conditions and letting down the many villagers who had faith in the conditions being adhered to in the first place. It would also set a harmful precedent for future planning applications in our village. There have been many written and verbal objections to the council about these unauthorised fences and gates, and we now rely on you to listen to us and to uphold and honour the inspector's conditions and reject this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And if you'd just like to hang on for a minute, I'll give the members an opportunity to ask you any questions. Members, any questions? Councillor Saunders.
It's not actually a question, Chair. I think I want to make it clear that actually I do know Mrs. Licorice, but we have not had any opportunity to discuss this issue. And I was unaware that she was speaking on behalf of the Highclere Society, which I'm also a member. And if they've come to the conclusion that they have, I was not party to that. So I thought I'd just make that clear at this stage. It doesn't affect my freedom, my independence of judgment on this.
Thank you very much for that's noted. Any questions to Ms. Licorice? Nope. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Licorice.
Thank you.
Councillor Isett.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes. Good evening, Councillor.
Good evening, Councillor, and good evening, Development Control Committee. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of my fellow ward councillor, Graham Faulkner, who's prevented from joining you tonight. So I'm going to read his statement. These two houses opposite the Red House pub have been on my casebook for 5.5 years. The application to build these properties was refused on the 30th of April 2015, but was allowed on appeal on the 11th of February 2016. The appeal stipulates that there needs to be substantial vehicular access with no gates to the property, and also mentions that in achieving this, there will be damage to the existing hedge, which should be replaced. A condition on the application is that there is to be the existing mature hedgerow and no fence. With the building of the two houses, a 2-metre fence measuring nearly 100 metres was erected with very large gates and the hedgerow removed. This caused a lot of local objection, and it caused noise problems for the Red House pub, its customers, and Rutherford Close. The noise assessment done for this application does not seem to have included visiting the Red House. An enforcement case was raised 18 months ago, and then a retrospective application was allowed to be submitted. This was going to be refused, but then Hampshire Highways stepped in as it realised the fence had been built on their land. Thus, the fence has to be demolished. This application moves the new fence back and also reduces the height to 1.5 metres. However, my support for the objectors, particularly the parish council's report, remains, as I still believe that noise is an issue, that it is an eyesore on the built landscape within the AONB, and it could be a threat to the viability of the Red House, as customers who would sit outside will be deterred from visiting. That's it.
Oh, thank you very much, John. Members, any questions for the ward member? No. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers? Bound and Potter to start with.
Thank you, Chair. On pages 238 and 239 of the report, we've got various distances that this fence has been moved back. Under proposal, it says the proposed fence will be sited 1.3 to 2.7 metres back from the site. Councillor Faulkner mentions 0.5 metre, and Highclere Parish Council mentioned 0.7 metre. I'm a bit unclear as to how far back the fence has gone. Could the officer clarify this for me?
Thank you. The distances referenced within the agenda report were measured from the submitted plan. The fence itself would be sited 80 centimetres away from the boundary highway. But because the existing fence encroaches onto over the highway boundary, the proposed fence would actually be sited, I think it was between 1.3 metres to 2.7 metres away from the current fence line. I don't know whether we can quickly get the visualizer up with the site plan. It might just help demonstrate the sightings of the fence. Thank you, Jill. So the red line, the most western red line on that plan, that's the siting of the existing unauthorised fence that you can see there where it encroaches onto the highway. The blue line is the highway boundary, and the green line, which is to the inside of the thick orange shaded area, that is where the proposed fence would go, with the shaded orange area then being the area of proposed planting. So hopefully that clarifies that for you.
Councillor Bound.
Could I ask how wide then the area of planting is?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? I didn't hear you.
How wide is the area of planting?
So the area of planting is that bit in between the highway boundary and the location of the fence. So that is 0.8 metres.
That's 0.8. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to be so.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I just trying to, as we often do, insert a degree of pragmatism in this. Can I just confirm the fact, I mean, notwithstanding the history of all of this, that were we to reject this application this evening, matters would stay as they are, presumably, and this fairly unsightly boundary fence would remain unaltered in the form that we see it. End of story. Is that right?
So the fence that's currently on the site is unauthorised. So it would be a matter for the enforcement team to investigate whether it was obviously expedient to enforce against it or to require its removal.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'll make my own conclusions about what might happen in those circumstances, but thank you for that.
Councillor Saunders.
Sorry, Chair, I was just trying to work out what 80 centimetres was in terms of a width, which I think is probably about that amount. However, I do have a question for if we could just look at, I don't know if she can get it up on her screen, where the adjacent boundaries are. So because on looking at one of the plans that I have here, it looks as if this revised boundary still steps forward at least a metre and a half from where the adjacent fencing is on the front. Question mark at the end of that.
Yes, I heard the question mark. Inferred.
Sorry, I'm just getting the plans up. So from what I can see on the proposed site plan with planting on page 249, the proposed fence line would abut or adjoin the neighbouring fence. And in terms of that's to the south, sorry, to the north, from the plans that I can see, the boundary line does follow the highway boundary. Can you just clarify which plan you were referring to?
Gemma, I think that's not right, because if you look at Flexford, I don't know whether it's Flexford Close, isn't it? If you look at the way that the road, you can't see it. On page 248, you can see it. It steps in, I think, does it not? Or away from the road. There. It comes in, I don't know what the name of that house there is, but I'm really trying just to get a sense of where this newly proposed fence, because we are all agreed that the fence as it currently is should not be there, should never have been there, and it is an absolute disaster by being there. But how far the newly proposed line is in keeping with what else is in that whole run of roadway down there and right the way along. And to give you a clue, I drove down it today, and I couldn't see that even the revised one would be similar to what is along that length of road, but you might have a different view.
Thank you. I do think that from the sighting on the site plan, the proposed fence to the south would abut with the fence line along on Fridays. That's certainly what the site plan suggests. Yeah. To the north,
I'd agree with you.
You are correct. Yeah, it's not going to abut with the boundary fence coming along Flexford Road, but that is down to the alignment of the highway boundary at that point.
But the fence which abuts whatever it's called, Fridays. The Fridays fence is about 900 centimeters high. It's sort of a paling fence, and this one is going to be virtually double the size, not quite, at 1.5 meters. That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So the proposed fence will be taller than the adjoining fence.
By about a factor of 2. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Saunders has covered my points. I think most of them. The only question is do we know, given this is currently built on Hampshire County Council land, Are they proposing to take any action to get this removed? Is it down for us to enforce it, or is it Hampshire County Council going to do anything about this?
My understanding is that Hampshire haven't granted permission for them to erect the fence on their highway verge, and that's certainly the correspondence that we've had from them. I think it would be a collective approach. Highways would obviously have an interest, or Hampshire County Council would obviously have an interest to get the fence removed, but from a planning perspective, in terms of the development that's happened, that would be up to us to get it removed if the enforcement team decided that that was the appropriate course of action.
Councillor Saunders again.
Well, because I think it is germane to this, and maybe Mike Townsend, that is, might be able to help us on this. It comes back a bit to the point that David Potter was making earlier on. Somehow or other, this needs to be removed, what is there at the moment. It would be terrible if we were to agree to something which actually didn't at the same time require the removal of what is there at the moment. But what is it that we have to do to link the removal with whatever goes there? Even if we decide not to approve this, that removal should and must take place. So how do we go about getting there? And I see Anne's face has loomed up on my screen. So maybe she's going to advise if Mike isn't.
I think it's open to the committee if they want to resolve that enforcement action should be taken against the fence, either to remove it or to reduce it in height so it's within PD levels. Unless Mike wants to disagree with me, it doesn't need to be left for an officer decision on that matter.
Which one, Lucy or Mike? I think you're both on screen.
I'll let Lucy go first, and I'll come in after if needs be.
Well, yeah, this was just to take you back to the planning history. The previous application, there was a previous application for close border fencing withdrawn. The applicant has tried to sort of work with case officer and relevant consultees to try and address the concerns, and this application is seeking to address the concerns. I appreciate you might have other issues with the fence that is on site, but I think it is quite important to note that they have tried to deal with the previous concerns raised.
Councillor McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So mention was made about the Hampshire as the highways officer. So I was a bit surprised to see on page 239 that there's no objection to this fence being built on their own land. I think there's a strong degree of consensus that it's in its current form needs to come down. I did try and see from looking at the drawings what its effect would be on the visibility splay. The road does bend at that point, but it doesn't bend a huge amount. So if you're actually on the main road itself, it probably isn't that much of an issue. But if you were emerging from that side driveway, you'd have a hell of a job trying to see out anyway. So I really don't understand why they put it there in the first place. And I'd be inclined to get it moved back, and if anything, the height reduced to make it easier for people to see coming out of that property.
Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to try and separate the two issues, the proposal in terms of the planning application before the committee is for a fence in a position set back in the way that Gemma's described. So that's 0.8 of a metre back from the highway at a height of 1.5 metres. The existing fence is not part of the planning application, and so enforcement can be taken separately on that point. So the issue being considered by the committee now is, would a fence in that location 0.8 metres back from the highway boundary at a height of 1.5 metres with the planting in front be acceptable or not? The separate issue then, if you like, is irrespective of any decision on that, there is an existing unauthorised fence for which planning enforcement action can be taken in terms of the development or Hampshire Highways could take action in terms of it being on the highway. I think in these situations, the way that the enforcement team would work would simply be to approach, obviously Hampshire, which they've already done in terms of where we've got to so far, and put bluntly, which is the quickest way to getting to the end point of having that existing fence removed. And I think certainly in your deliberations, you can certainly make those points around your views on that. But I think those can be taken forward separately in any case, irrespective of your view on the planning application, the proposal before you, Chair. Hopefully that clarifies matters.
All right, thank you. Councillor McCormack, followed by Councillor Potter, followed by Councillor Tomlin, followed by me.
Are we in debate now, Chair?
No, questions to officers.
Okay, well, I think my question was answered in as much as we've got two actions in front of us to take out this existing fence, which is hideous and could potentially impede safe sight lines out. And what do we replace it with? I don't have any further questions at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Potter.
I mean, am I missing something here? I mean, it just seems to me, and we heard from the applicant, I mean, it's axiomatic, and I'm not sure it's quite the right word, that the new proposal would replace that exists. I mean, nobody's going to build a new fence as well as what is there. I mean, there's no logic. I mean, the intention, as we heard, is for this new fence of a lower height, softened, as he said, and I think the case officer supports this in the fullness of time, to soften the appearance of that as well. That new fence would replace what is there now, and therefore, if we approve this, it achieves at least part of the answer to the concerns that have been expressed over many times by a number of people. So I would have thought one goes with the other, does it not?
I think that was a question to officers for review, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
Understanding the officer has, you know.
Sorry, I think it just goes back to what Mike was saying, in that they are two separate issues, and that the proposal that's before the committee today is the erection of the fence in that proposed location, and the existing fence would have to be removed, or appropriate enforcement action taken, regardless of what the outcome of this application was.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Whether the officer, please, could clarify the comment on page 239. It's in the Highclere Parish Council's submission, but it makes reference to saying the landscape officer proposed, it's that chapter, that paragraph there, proposed that the best option would be a 3-rail post and fence about 1.2 metres high, and obviously is a preferred solution. Is that our landscape officer? Because I can't find that anywhere else in the document unless I've missed it. Or is it some other landscape officer? And if so, why is it we're not listening to them? Thank you, chap.
Thank you. Yes, it is the council landscape officer. Within their comments submitted on the application, they referred to the previously approved landscaping scheme, which was part of the conditions on the application for the 2 dwellings. That the approved landscaping for that western boundary incorporated a post and rail fence and hedging, and the landscape officer within their comments on this current application referenced that and said that that would be better, a better proposal. Having said that, the proposals before us, in combination with the location of the fence, the planting to the front of that fence, and the height of the fence, would be acceptable in landscape terms. And so that, I believe, is what the parish is referring to within their comments.
I was going to ask a question, but I think Councillor Tomlin has actually answered it, because bearing in mind what the appeal decision had already said, that, and what has been commented upon by some of the visiting speakers, I'll talk about this in debate and sum it up in debate, because I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Tomlin. No more questions to officers? Debate. Who'd like to kick this off? Councillor Saunders, George, Potter, McCormack.
Chair, I have a lot of sympathy with the owners of these properties because it is the A343. It's a busy road, and you would like to have some degree of fencing or something partly for security purposes, but partly as well. I mean, if you've got a dog or whatever, to prevent them escaping from there. So I think there is a need for some kind of barrier, but the barrier that has always been along that road has been, for the most part, hedging. There was hedging there originally, and the plan was to put hedging back. Now, with the best will in the world, I don't believe that an 80 centimetre gap is wide enough to get a proper hedge in. And I'm just in the process of planting a hedge myself. And so I know the distance you have to go to get something there that isn't going to then come out over onto the highway or cause problems. So I don't think there's adequate gap there to produce an adequate hedge that would then basically disguise whatever fencing you put behind it. The problem is that kind of fencing is suburban type fencing. You see a lot of it around in the new estates that we've built. It is not in keeping, for the most part, with what you find in Highclere, which tend to be either brick walls or they're brick walls with iron railings on the top of them or whatever. And most of them, not all of them, you'll find exceptions to every rule, are around 1.3, 4 foot in old currency, high at the maximum. And I would have been much happier with a proposal which suggested something of that ilk at about 4 foot high, 1.3, set a bit further back to allow some decent planting, say 1 metre, 1.20 metre of planting in front of it before it gets to the highways boundary. Obviously, we can't control in the future how high that hedge will grow, but that it will at least be a hedge and won't be a wooden wall. So I think on that basis, though I have a lot of sympathy with why the residents there would like to get something resolved, I think still we haven't got the right solution. And it is a very focal part, being opposite the village pub, a very focal part of the village.
Thank you. Councillor George.
Thank you, Chair. I think Ms. Saunders covered most of it, but I think if we just compare it with keeping what's at around Fridays to the south and the other houses to the north, they're of much lower height, around, as I say, 1.20 metre by looking at them, if you look at it on Google. And to be honest with you, these home, and if you look at Fridays to the south, it's quite nice. It's set back, you can see it, but it's set back and there's security. And these houses are set well back from the road. I don't think there's any need to put a big, high, ugly fence in there. So I really don't think what's being proposed, even as a, take away the existing one, but even the new one that's being proposed is really in keeping at all with the with the local area. I really don't.
Councillor Potter.
Well, I think I take the professional officer's view on this, and she is saying, I think that in her view, the proposal would be compliant and consistent with the local landscape character, providing that the screening, the landscape screening, has the impact that she suggests it will in time. And I think we heard from the owner that hopefully the mix of species will be quick growing and therefore give a much more softened appearance. I mean, the condition we apply, obviously, belt and braces, I guess, is to make it absolutely clear that this approval, if it were to be given, is on the condition that the existing fence comes down and is replaced by whatever might be approved this evening. That's the way that the two things are satisfied in one go, really. And I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation in this regard, Chair.
Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I prefer no fence and a hedge, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I'm not sure if we can do that within the constraints that are placed upon us tonight. I take it almost as a given that the the existing fence will be removed. There will be enforcement action to do that. And if permission is given for this fence 0.8 metres back, I don't see it as making a huge difference, but I would reluctantly support it.
Fine. I'm going to throw my 3 pennyworth into this, and I thank Councillor Tomlin for asking the question about what the landscape officer's comment was, the one on 239, and going back to a previous permission that identified a low post and rail fence with hedging to ultimately have a hedge in the back, which I think, I'm not quite sure how many of the committee feel that way, but notwithstanding that, I think we've got unanimity, or a fair bit of unanimity, that what is there at the moment has got to go. It's a question of what comes thereafter. And bearing in mind the environment of Highclere, I don't live anywhere near there, obviously, but I've been through there several times. And looking at the viewing photographs we've got tonight, this thing is totally inappropriate. I know it's brand new and it would weather eventually, but it's not right for that particular road. I think everything is, whether we have conditions or anything else coming out of what we end up with this evening, I cannot accept the officer's recommendation as it stands. I think about halfway, for most of us, we've got to get rid of this existing fence. It's what comes afterwards, and the mechanism for doing that, whether it's conditioned or anything else, or whether we have options, I don't know. And I'm going to ask get advice from you, Mike, that I've got one councillor who supports this at the moment. I haven't had a motion. I'll call for a motion for approve or the officer's recommendation in a minute. But the way this is going, I think we need to be clear. The committee needs to be clear on what is the art of the possible here.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first action would be to decide on the proposal within the application.
Okay.
It simply is that acceptable in planning terms or not? If it is, then clearly that would be as per the officer's recommendation. If it's not, then someone motioning refusal would obviously state the reasons for refusal. I think that the issue of the existing fence can be dealt with separately, but Chair, I'd suggest that first point about is the application proposal
fine, yes,
or not, is the first part.
Right. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Bound.
Sorry. I would second Councillor Potter on this, because I think, I mean, the fence as it is now will go if this proposal is acceptable. I appreciate that the sort of feeling within the rest of the people here is perhaps that this won't pass, but I will second Councillor Potter's proposal.
And Councillor Potter, your proposal is?
Simply to support the officer's report that's before us, and which recommends approval of the application, Chair, really.
Okay.
Would you forgive me, could I just make one point? I know you know, some reference has been made to the landscape officer. I mean, we often have within the context of our reports comments by specialist officers, but it's down to the case officer, the expert case officer, to come to a conclusion overall when she or he has received comments from a whole range of people who've had specialist views about a particular application, and come to a conclusion, yes or no, in terms of that recommendation. I mean, it doesn't hinge around one particular officer's commentary, and in any case, he or she, I think, is saying within those comments that that additional sort of 80 centimetre gap that's been provided here, or proposed, sorry, with landscaping is an element of this that she or he would, I think, commend, and in the fullness of time would soften the whole appearance, really. That's why I'd recommend approval, Chair.
Okay. Right, it's been moved for and seconded for approval as per the application and the report. I'm going to run down the Councillors, and I'm going to see Councillor Court.
Against.
Councillor Saunders.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to vote against on the grounds that I don't believe an 80-centimetre gap is wide enough for a hedge, nor that there are better solutions which have been put forward by our landscape officer and by the inspector when she looked at it.
Councillor Goodison.
Against.
Councillor George.
Against.
Councillor Frankham. Councillor Frankham. No, you're going.
Sorry, yes. So, I'm against. I think it's not in keeping and detrimental to the street scene.
Councillor Grant.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor McCormick.
Against. I'd like to see the original planning application, which had a hedgerow. I'd like to see that implemented.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin.
Against.
Officers.
I have 7 against the recommendation, 2 for and 1 abstention.
Thank you. That application is failed. Now, Mike, I'm going to ask you the question. Now, can we move forward as an alternative to this application?
Chair, I think on the basis that the vote for approval of the application has been lost by definition, then someone would need to motion an alternative for refusal based on the reasons set out, which, listening to the debate, appear to be around impact on the character of the area of the proposed fence, notwithstanding the landscaping proposed. But it would be for whoever motions that, Chair, to set out that reason for refusal.
Councillor Saunders.
Chair, I'm quite happy to move a motion on the grounds that Mike has just outlined, but to try to make sure that we include in this the fact that the existing fence should be removed and that appropriate enforcement action should be taken for that fence to be removed, and that a better solution be found that does meet the requirements. And we get to, I think, the points which Dame Frankham made about the landscape, various people have made, going back to the original plan which Councillor McCormick made, all of those which can be adduced as being the reasons for refusal. They're also the very good reason for getting the existing fence taken down.
And also, maybe I used the wrong expression about the landscape officer, but he was referring back to an original approval of this post and rail fencing, which I believe was approved in a previous application on this. And so we don't have to dream that up. That's been described already.
I think it was the one that the inspector actually approved. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't quote me on that, but I think it was. But I'm sure Mike.
Yes, I agree.
Put together the right form of words.
And I wasn't sure of that either, and I'd defer to officers to approve that. But that's the motion before us, Mike. Do we need to refine the wording there?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I think the and Anne may wish to come in on this in terms of the practicalities, but if I've understood the intent of the motion is that the committee is expressing, or Councillor Sanders is expressing for the motion, that the application proposals before you are unacceptable because of the impact on the character of the area, because of the height,
yes,
0.5 metres of the fence, relevant to the sort of typical boundaries and character of the area. So I think that would be contrary to policies EM1 and EM10 of the local plan. But also, the motion includes the intent for enforcement action to be authorised as well, effectively for the same reasons, albeit that the impact is more acute of the fence in its current location, because obviously it's a taller fence in a more prominent location. So effectively the reason for refusal of the current application would also be the reasons for enforcement being sought on the existing fence, if I've understood the motion correctly, Chair.
I think, Mike, if I could just add to that, if I may, Chair, it is the sheer length of this fence that it's an exceptional length of fencing for anywhere in the area, and it really does make it stand out enormously compared with other fencing, which is because it's that much lower, because it's that much shorter, is not so obtrusive into the street scene.
Chair, I think then the reason for refusal would be relevant to the height, length and prominence of the fence in relation to the adverse impact on the character of the area.
Thank you. Anne, did you want to add something? You're muted at the moment, Anne.
Apologies. You might not be able to remove the fence totally because it would be an option for them to reduce it down to PD height. So the enforcement notice would be in the alternative, either remove or reduce the height of the fence down to PD levels.
Notwithstanding that it encroaches into a highway. We would be condoning that if it was going into the highway. Then it goes back. Sorry, I'm using a bit of argument debate here. Back to Hampshire County Council to then initiate enforcement action.
I think Hampshire County Council have got their own highways powers if they want to do anything about it, but I doubt they will. So we're looking at our enforcement powers, and they would be able to keep it at a certain height. I don't know what that is offhand. No doubt the planners do, but it might not be total removal.
Can you hang on, please? We're not. We've got to sort this motion out first. Right. Councillor Tomlin seconded it, and he's got his hand up. So I'd just like to bring him on this, Councillor Potter. I've noted you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to second, but I think we're missing also the word style of fence. I thought the
yes, exactly.
We need to add. Okay, so I'm happy if we could add that and to second it.
Thank you. Councillor Potter.
I just simply wanted to check with Anne and Mike. I mean, it's unusual, it seems to me, for us on the one hand to be rejecting the application that's before us, but also then to add on an enforcement provision which relates to a previous planning application. I mean, the two things are by definition separate applications, and we're rolling the two into one. And I do also make the point, be careful of what you wish for here, really, because the permitted development process of this is that a slightly lower fence could be permitted development in itself. I don't need to say more about that, what the owner might do in those circumstances. So let's just be a little cautious about this.
I think you're enforcing on the basis that it's unauthorised development rather than do the previous application.
This is why I'm trying to cross the T's and dot the I's here, because we want to get this right.
Chair, it seems very strange that you can do something which is wrong, which is against what was actually approved, and then by cutting it in half, it suddenly becomes right. I don't think that is two wrongs not making a right, or whatever the right phrase is.
Half a wrong makes a right.
Well, yes, yes, or even 2/3 of a wrong or something. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to be. The logic is not there somehow. So if I steal £1,000, that's very bad. But if I give them 500 quid back, that's all right.
Philip.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point on the permitted development discussion that's underway. The permitted development would allow a fence up to 1 metre adjoining a highway, but that's only within the applicant's land and ownership. If it's outside that land, it wouldn't be considered permitted development in my understanding of it. It would have to be within their land and their ownership only, and then it's up to 1 metre adjoining a highway. I just wanted to put that in just to help the situation. But yes.
Right, thank you very much. That does provide a bit of clarity. So they can't just chop the fence down that exists now because it's not in their ownership. And that is the whole point of that's the way I feel it. It's how we impose that in our deliberations here. That's what we've got to try and figure out. Councillor George, I wanted to thrash this one out, so go ahead, Councillor George.
Yeah, I understand your point there, Chair, but I just would point out that if you look at the metre high fence, the same style as they got at the moment, that's exactly what they've got around the building to the south. So it would be difficult to enforce that, given that fundamentally, what's the name of the building to the south? It's Fridays has got precisely, it looks about a metre high, exactly the same as they've got there, but just a metre high. So it may be a little bit difficult to use that as a point of enforcement.
Well, I'm still trying to.
So if just last point on this, which is that if it is possible, let's assume that the problem fence is gone. If the owners wished to put a metre high fence around there, there is nothing we can do to stop them, nor should we be trying to do that, because that's within permitted development rights. If I was them, because they can't then plant, because they have to plant it right on the boundary of their property, they can't then put a hedge in front of it, then they're really cutting their noses off to spite their face. If they were to move the whole thing back better and then to do it, then I think probably we'd get everything that people are looking for, which is a decent sized hedge and a removal of the eyesore, which is this mile of close boarded high fencing. But I think that is something for them to deal with in a future application, not something which we can actually deal with at the moment.
Mike?
Yeah, I think on applications where planning permission is refused, we do sometimes put on an informative note, which is the effect of, although this particular application was refused, alternatives could be considered, and the applicant is encouraged to engage with the local planning authority for those alternatives. So we could certainly include an informative note on a refusal. Bear in mind that's the motion at the moment is for refusal, Chair. So we can include that informative to encourage further dialogue on an alternative. And clearly the applicant will have heard this debate. Chair, just think in terms of trying to wrap up the motion, the motion, as I understand it, is for refusal for the reasons related to the length, style, and length, height, prominence, and style of the fence not being in keeping with the character of the area, contrary to policies EM1 and EM10. So that is a refusal for the planning application. The issue of the enforcement of the existing fence, and again, I would just invite Anne in on this if that's appropriate, Chair, can continue without committee resolution on that. So if it can still continue, it doesn't need committee resolution because it is not a retrospective application for that fence. So you are not considering that fence directly within this item. So that decision around enforcement can continue, as can the liaison with Hampshire Highways as to who is best placed to seek to secure its removal.
Now, would the committee be satisfied with that? An informative, we've already voted for a refusal of this application. The informative along the lines as described by Mike. Anne?
I think at the moment you've got a proposal and it's been seconded, hasn't it, for a refusal and enforcement action. Mike's quite right. You don't have to include enforcement action. He can make a delegated decision after discussing it with Hampshire Highways. But you would need to amend the proposal that's on the table if that's what you want to do.
But is there anything to stop us as a committee saying we wish to see enforcement taken on this fence?
No.
Now that's essentially what we've got at the moment, is a motion to ensure enforcement action is taken on this existing fence.
Yes.
Yes? Period. With the informative that Mike has described. Would that satisfy? I have to ask you, Councillor Saunders, you've moved
Yes,
this motion.
no, that would. I mean, I'm trying to be positive and helpful to these
Yes.
poor people who are trying to resolve it, the issue. But the fence has to go. We have to make the point, and I think it is unanimous. I may be wrong, that the fence should go. The existing fence should go. What we want to try and find is the best way possible. We can't
Yes.
approve the new application because we don't think that is a better or the best solution for that. But if they work with officers, I'm sure they can get there.
Fine. That's the way we'll proceed. So it's been moved and seconded that this fence, as detailed in this particular application, that enforcement action is taken for the removal of that fence. With the informatives described by Mike about the interaction and discussion between Hampshire Highways and everybody else, that's what's on the table. If you're satisfied with that, Councillor Saunders, and you are, Councillor Tomlin, I will put that to the vote. And we'll run down for this proposal. Councillor Court.
Approval.
That's for approval of that.
Approval of the motion as just discussed.
Thank you. Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, for the motion.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
For. Councillor George.
For the motion.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
Abstain.
Say again?
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you. Councillor Potter.
Abstain.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For the motion.
Thank you very much. Officers?
I have 8 for the recommendation and 2 abstentions.
Thank you. And officers?
Thank you, Chair. That application has been refused due to adverse impact on the character of the area by virtue of the length, style, height and prominence of the proposed fence. In conjunction, it's been resolved for enforcement action to be taken on the existing fence, and the refusal also subject to an informative in relation to the engagement or on alternative options with officers.
Thank you very much. And thank you, members.
Sorry, Chair, there's just one thing which I don't want to confuse it all, but there is the question of the gates, which came up in that, which I think was cited along with the fence. I don't know how officers think we should handle the question of the gates.
Bearing in mind that the inspector said there should not be any gates there.
The inspector did indeed say that, but we haven't discussed the issue at all.
Mike, do we include the gates in all this, or do we?
Yeah, Chair, I think so. I think the gates are included in the sense that they are in the description of the development for the proposed development. And I think in terms of the enforcement, I would have taken it as implied that relates to the entirety of that boundary, which would be fence and gates. So I think that's a good point of clarification for Councillor Sanders, and I would have read it that way, but perhaps that could just be clarified that was the basis of the motion, Chair.
Right.
I only raised it because the gates are considerably inside the boundary.
Yeah, and I see Councillor Tomlin nodding. You're happy with that, Councillor Tomlin?
Well, on the basis that we should be including it as it was part of the application, yes.
Mike?
Yeah.
Mike Townsend?
That's fine, Chair. We'll include both in the reason for refusal and on the enforcement.
Thank you very much. I'll say it again, committee. Thank you very much for that. That was effective. Right, I move on to item number 7. And for item number 7, it's always on the wrong page. Mr. Laster, Mr. Davidson.
Good evening again, Councillor.
Evening,
Yeah,
Ian.
Ambassador speaking.
And Mr. Davidson, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Okay, gentlemen, if you just sit tight, and I'll get the officers to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 7, which can be found on page 250 of tonight's agenda, is for the erection of 1 two-bed dwelling and detached garage with associated amenity space. If I could draw members' attention to the update paper, we had an updated comment received from Borghurst Parish Council, just asking to remove their third objection as outlined in the officer's report with regards to the public right of way. The application is recommended for refusal as outlined within the officer's report, and the application has been brought to tonight's development control at the request of Councillor Lovegrove. Thank you.
Mr. Lassiter, Mr. Davidson, between you, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And with apologies to Councillor Potter, I'd like to address primarily the policy issues and then hand over to Mr. Davidson. That the local plan policies SS1 and SS6 are out of date is common ground. So that means little weight can be given to those policies and the presumption in favour of sustainable development applies. The NPPF therefore takes precedence and states that where the local plan policies are out of date, permission will be granted unless the harm significantly and demonstrably outweighs the benefits. Accordingly, the conflict with an out-of-date policy is not sufficient to justify refusal, and members must consider whether or not the level of harm is of sufficient magnitude to outweigh the benefits. We say there would be no harm, let alone a level of harm that would reach that very high threshold. The alleged harm appears to be on the basis that the dwelling would be seen and that there would be change to the appearance of the site. Of course, that is true, but it won't be seen from the public rights of way as alleged, only from Church Lane with its otherwise continuous ribbon of houses. In any case, I say change can be positive, and I believe the proposed dwelling would be very attractive, will enhance this infill site, causing no harm whatsoever. So I say there will be no conflict with EM1 or EM10 as alleged. I also contend that contrary to the suggestion in the report, Church Lane is not an isolated location, either by virtue of the Braintree judgment or your own local plan definition of settlement. These are subjective judgments that we are all entitled to make. We must assess the planning balance and give weight to sometimes competing considerations. There is no planning balance section in the officer's report, but I believe it is very significant that nowhere in the report are you told that the harm would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Yet that is the key test. I now hand over to Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to speak this evening. You've heard about policy from my planning consultant, and I hope that you've seen my client statement that was part of my planning application. My parents have lived in Wolverton for over 30 years, and my intention is for this house to be a home for them, as they're keen to downsize from our family home, but want to stay in the local Wolverton community. I'd like to have them living close by to me, as their care needs are only going to increase over time, and therefore the site has, in my view, a social need. I'm also an architect. I've lived next door to the site for 8 years since building my own family home, and with this application I've designed a highly sustainable lifetime home for them, reflecting the local vernacular in both its form and its materials, that will be flexible to the care needs of my parents. I plan to use solar storage power, electric car charging points, an air heat recovery system, and rainwater harvesting. The scheme will enhance the biodiversity of the existing site, as I plan to plant new native hedgerows, fruit trees, and have a carefully designed garden. In short, this will be a sustainable home for the long-term future of my family. In response to the landscape objection that makes up part of the report, the site to us is infill on Church Lane. It completes a ribbon of housing. It isn't visible from either of the footpaths mentioned. It's not an arable field or a paddock and has not been in agricultural use for over 60 years. Following receipt of the objection, I commissioned a landscape visual assessment, and within that, an independent expert ecologist has also summarised that the proposal does not harm the landscape and visual amenity or ruin the rural character of the area. I'd also like to say that all of my immediate neighbours have expressed support for my application, and thank you for giving me the time to speak this evening.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, and I appreciate you being on time. Now, questions to the applicant. Any questions to the applicant? No. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Lovegrove, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, and you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the meeting this evening. I brought this to the committee for the benefit of councillors to make a decision on this application, as I believe it is a grey area as far as policy is concerned, but on balance, it should be approved. Having had the benefit of a visit to the site of Church Lane, I recall the houses on the left, then a gap, then Kites Hill. Just like a smiling face greeting me with a tooth missing. Seriously, I think the reason I said this, of course, was that the dwelling on the proposed site would be in keeping with the street scene and therefore definitely not out of keeping. Moving on to the site, which occupies a large open pasture type field, which would, of course, would benefit from additional indigenous trees, offering extra interface for biodiversity, etc. Also, the trees would soften the visible roof lines from a southerly view, and likewise the 2 existing mature trees in the front of the proposal development for the northerly view. The proposed development, the proposed dwelling will occupy the central space of the site, thus mitigating the possibility of further houses. To sum up, I believe this is a genuine application that meets the local requirements and ask for your possible support, please. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions to the ward councillor? Nope. Thank you very much, Councillor Lovegrove.
Thank you.
Questions to officers? Silence. Debate. And we'd like to get this off. Councillor Bound.
Yeah, I'm the other ward councillor for this application site, Chair. I am broadly in favour, I believe, of the application, probably because this committee actually approved the application next door, which was for 3 agricultural dwellings. Now, I was very, very much against this, believing it to be not appropriate in the street scene. And when the application report sort of talks about the character of the area being disturbed by this infill dwelling, I'm afraid the damage has already been done by those 3 dwellings. And there is a nice picture which well illustrates these buildings next door to the application site. Still uncompleted, I have to say, with building material and fencing all around it. Yes, this will obstruct the views through to the golf course slightly from the little road, which is used by walkers and riders and all sorts of people. But I believe that the applicant has the best sort of feelings for the area to the forefront of his thoughts in terms of the planning. And when he talks about the planting around this particular building, I believe that it will actually enhance the area, because it's just an infill between Kites Hill, where he lives, and these 3 rather ugly buildings next door. I am, of course, open to persuasion the other way from members of the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Bound. Councillor Potter.
Oops. Thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't know whether I'll surprise Mr. Lassiter this evening or not, really, but I do give a lot of credence, really, and importance to the Braintree case, quite frankly, and it has significantly, whether we like it or not, changed, I think, our assessment of a number of now outdated policies, really, in this regard. I mean, in regard to this matter, and Councillor Barnes just made a couple of local observations which I support really in regard to its siting. I mean, it isn't physically remote from other built form. That's a matter of fact. I mean, you know, there are other built form properties around. As to whether it's remote from a settlement, I mean, again, you get into all this sort of subjective stuff about what actually forms a settlement anyway, really. But I certainly don't consider this to be an isolated site. And I think the design of the property that's being proposed is good, and I think would improve the particular street scene in that area. I regret the fact, and I mean, obviously the officers, we've gone down this road ad nauseum, I think, really in regard to SS6 and other policies that we hold on to, that probably they're in some dilemma in regard to the final conclusions they reach. And on this occasion, I think the conclusion is wrong, and I'd like to see this application succeed this evening, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. And Councillor Saunders.
I'd just like to move the recommendation. Sorry, no, not move the recommendation, because the recommendation is to refuse. I'd like to propose a motion to approve.
Right, Councillor Saunders. And could we have the reasons for approval on your motion?
Because it doesn't do all the things that are in the reasons to refuse. In other words, that it is sustainable because of where it is. Therefore, it does meet the policies SD1, SS1, and SS6, and it will not have an adverse effect on the visual amenity and landscape character of the area. So it's if you like, the mirror image of the reasons for refusal.
Understood. I've got a proposer. Do I have a seconder to this motion? And Councillor McCormick.
Yeah, the benefits, I think, outweigh the detrimental aspects of this application. I don't know how that can be factored in as reasons for approval, but I see that as, on balance, the fundamental reason why I would go for approval on this application.
Fair enough. Now, I have to go to officers before we take a vote on this. It's been moved and seconded. We have the reasons for approval. Do we not need to look at conditions?
Yes, Chair, I think that would be the case. So Philip will go through a list of suggested conditions, but just to, I suppose, confirm the understanding of the reasons for approval for the motion, pick up on both Councillor Sanders and Councillor McCormack's points. It was the fact that the development is considered to be a sustainable form of development. It's not in an isolated location where the any impacts are not outweighed by the any impacts are outweighed by the benefits, picking up on Councillor McCormack's point, and that the design is acceptable and in keeping with the character of the area. Those are the sort of key elements that I think I picked up from the discussion on those reasons for approval, and therefore that would be the basis of the motion. And then Philip would just run through suggested conditions, Chair.
Right, now or afterwards? Now.
Now, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the suggested conditions for the application is an application with regards to being built in accordance with the submitted plans, that the development shall begin before the expiration of 3 years from the date of the permission, that no development above damp-proof core shall commence into a schedule of materials and finishes to be used for the external walls and roof has been submitted, that any gates provided shall be set back a distance of 6 meters from the edge of the carriageway, that the development shall not be occupied or use commenced until provision of turning, loading and unloading of vehicles and the parking of 4 vehicles and 3 cycles has been made within the site, that no development shall commence until any works of demolition until a construction method statement has been submitted and agreed, that the proposed development and use hereby approved shall not be occupied or commence sooner until the access has been constructed in accordance with the approved plans, that the submitted details until details of the disposal of sewage have been submitted and approved in writing. That the submitted plans, no development above approved damp-proof course shall commence until details of materials to be used in hard and paved surfacing has been submitted and approved. That no works relating to the construction of the development shall take place at specified hours, as the standard condition with regard to the hours. So before the hours of 7:30 or after 6 o'clock Monday to Friday, or before 8 and after 1 o'clock on Saturdays or on Sundays or any recognised public holidays. That no deliveries of construction materials or plant shall be taken from the site in line with the hours as outlined above. That no development or other operations shall commence on site until a tree protection plan has been submitted and approved. Prior to the occupation of the development, a wall-mounted bat roost or bird nesting box shall be erected on the property. Prior to development, a biodiversity management plan shall be provided. No development, including any demolition work, soil movement, or temporary construction, access, or widening, shall be commenced until a wildlife protection and mitigation plan has been submitted. Obscure glazing for any bathroom windows, contamination, condition, and verification, as well as a construction statement detailing how the home will meet water efficiency standards of 110 litres or less per day. And then finally, notwithstanding the approved plan, no development above damp-proof course shall take place until there's been submitted an appropriate landscaping scheme that will be approved in writing. So there were some suggested conditions, Chair. Whether the councillors have anything further to add or if that's sufficient, they were the suggestions.
Thank you very much, Mike.
And just to add to that, Chair, in terms of that list, the resolution will be to delegate to officers the ability to agree pre-commencement conditions with the applicant where they are pre-commencement conditions.
Understood. And in all this, there's also the informative that goes on the tail end of any decisions and any approvals to do with COVID-19. Oh, sorry, with the climate change.
Climate change, yes,
The climate change is informative. Sorry.
Correct.
Heard so much about that other thing. But it's been moved and seconded for approval with the reasons given and for the conditions just enumerated. I'll go through the list. Councillor Court.
For approval.
Councillor Saunders.
For the motion to approve.
Yeah. Councillor Goodison.
For approval.
Councillor George.
For approval.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For.
Thank you, committee. Officers.
That's 10 for the recommendation.
Thank you, Bernie. And we've gone through the conditions, Philip.
That's correct. So thank you, Chair. So the application has been approved for the reasons outlined and subject to the conditions suggested by officers, subject to the agreement of the pre-commencement following the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. Move on to item number 8.
Do we need to move standing orders or anything? Because it's
it's 9:15, but 9:30 is when we do that, and crack on with this one. We're not going to finish before 9:30, that's for sure. We've got the 2 items following these. I'll mention it now, and thanks for the reminder, Councillor McCormack. Is everybody content to continue? If we can say 10 o'clock. Consensus? Yes.
Yep.
Right. Thank you very much. Move that till 10 o'clock. And item number 8, it's Mr. Laster again.
Hello again, Councillor.
Hello, Mr. Laster, and Lucy will introduce the application.
Thank you. This is an application for the erection of a 4-bedroom dwelling to include a vehicular access onto Silchester Road. The dwelling would actually sit between Dunelm to the northeast and set aside a dwelling to the southwest. There is a short update on the application that I need to set out that the recommendation is actually for approve rather than granted, and following discussions between the applicant, the case officer and HCC Highways, it's been agreed that suitable visibility space can be achieved to the front of the access. So yep, nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Mr. Laster, you've got 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. As with item 5, I agree with your officer's recommendation and assessment, and I do not propose to make a speech in this case. Had I done so, it would have closely resembled the officer's stated reasons for approval. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much.
I appreciate your brevity. Bear in mind, it's moving on this evening. Any questions for Mr. Laster, members? He's at your bidding at the moment. Nope. Thank you, Mr. Laster, for being patient.
Good night.
Good night. Questions to officers? Councillor Saunders.
Quick question, Chair. On page 277, listed under public observations, there is an observation that says the distance between the proposed house and set aside is less than shown on the site plan used by the applicant because it does not include a recent extension on set aside. I think the question to officers is that correct? Because I couldn't actually find an application for a recent extension to set aside unless it was done under permitted development.
Apologies, I'm just going to have a look for you. I won't be a second.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, just whilst Lucy's looking at the detail, I think this does often come up where location plans submitted for applications might be ordnance survey plans or old location plans, and they might not necessarily pick up all developments that have happened on a site. As you say, Councillor, sometimes it's permitted development extensions, etc. I think the key issue is that when applications come in, the location plan is the red line plan to identify the boundary, but the physical context, if you like, is obviously subject to the site visit undertaken by the case officer. So the objective may well be correct in that the location plan may not fully reflect the next door property as is now, but certainly that would have been taken into account during the case officer's site visit informing.
Yeah, I'm just to clarify, you're right, Mike. The on page 288, the case officer actually sets out that they note the letter of objection was not that the development was not accurately shown, but they set out that site plans are not always up to date. However, the officer has been able to view the planning history of set aside and assess the extension against the proposal, and the application has been considered on that basis. So the distances are still acceptable, notwithstanding that it might not have been shown on that plan.
So just to clarify, are we saying that the plan that we're looking at on page 295 is right or it isn't right? And if it isn't right, then what are the distances we're talking about between the proposed dwelling and set aside?
Well, the dwelling, the site plan that you can see in relation to set aside, sorry, in relation to the application site shows how close it is to the boundary with the neighbouring property set aside. Set aside already goes in right up to the boundary in any event.
Can you clarify what that is? I mean, how far are they? 2 feet apart? Are they holding hands? Is that actually, because it's, I mean, we've got no scale on this drawing, so I'm just wondering what I'm looking at.
Mike?
Yeah, I think in terms of the relationship to set aside, if I can draw members' attention to page 285, I think it's second sentence of the second paragraph down under set aside, new dwelling would also propose a single story element adjacent to set aside that would measure 2.2 metres in width, sitting the two-story massing of the dwelling in excess of 5 metres away from the neighbour. So I think if I relate that to the site plan, what that's effectively saying is that small, on page 295, that small single story element, if you like, is obviously within sort of relative proximity to the boundary, but the two-story element, so the sort of next line in, if that makes sense, is in excess of 5 metres away.
Okay. Right, Councillor George.
Thank you. Just on that point, Chair, I did have a look at Google on this, and I would point out that there's a very, very substantial hedgerow running down the side of set aside there, very substantial, high, thick hedgerow there. So although the two properties may be fairly close together, I think perhaps the officers can show this on some of their drawings, but it's quite a well screened area between the two.
I also notice it's that hedge you refer to is identified on the proposed street scene diagram on the visualizer. Right. Any other questions to officers? Nope. Debate. Oh, Councillor Bound.
No, it wasn't a question. It was just to point out that the proposed site plan seems to show an extension to set aside when you compare it with the location plan. That was all.
Yep. Debate. Councillor Potter.
Sorry, I do beg your pardon, I'm trying to unmute. I mean, I find it a bit ironic in a sense when, for example, set aside whoever is the owner chooses to build right up to the boundary line, and they then might form an objection because a property next to it perhaps wants to do something similar, really. There's a certain irony in that, I think, isn't there, really? But all that apart, I mean, the officer's observations on that, I think, are very clear. I had some reservations, I mean, consistent with one or two of the things that have been said by local objectors about the bulk and mass of the proposed dwelling, but actually looking at it in context and comparison to adjoining dwellings, not really. And I think it's a good design. It's a good, dare I say, an infill development in regard to the plot that we're looking at. I have no hesitation really in supporting the officer's recommendation here that this application should be approved, and I'm happy to put that forward as a proposal, Chair.
Okay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Bound. And one comment I'll make, how useful it was for some of these proposals that they showed the original drawings, the original outline in dotted, and what is proposed in the solid description, presentations of it. It gives you an idea that they've actually thought about reducing it down to have the same ridge height as the adjacent properties. I found that useful. I don't see it too often. Right, it's been proposed and seconded for approval. I'll run down the list unless anybody else has any other comment. Nope. Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
Yes, approve.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
Approve.
Councillor Frankham.
I had to leave the room. I would have been for, but I'm forced to abstain.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For.
That is approved. Officers.
Sorry, can I just confirm, Councillor Sanders? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I heard him. He for.
Okay, well then that's
I'm
9-4.
I'm cut to the quick. You didn't hear me, but it was 4.
That's 9-4 and 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's carried, officers and conditions.
Thank you. Yes, that application is approved. subject to conditions and informatives as set out in the main agenda report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, agenda item number 6. Removal of section 106 obligations. Bramley and Sherfield. Now, I have to think here, items, that's the next one. Who's taking this one, officers?
I will, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And firstly, apologies to the committee for not including a location plan in the agenda pack, which is now up on screen. Effectively, this is an application for variation of a section 106, but the variation has the effect of removal of the original requirements of the 106. Just to briefly explain the planning history to this, an application was approved back in 2003 for the use of the upper floors and part of the ground floor of a building, which is now known as the Lodge, which is the sort of small square building on the plan just to the northeast of what's labelled a pond. At that time, the Planning Permission was subject to a Section 106 agreement that tied the ownership of the garage stroke store home office accommodation to what's now labelled Cufford Manor. Since that time, a planning application has been approved under the reference number quoted at the top of this slide for change of use of that of unit now to a single dwelling. The issue effectively that remains is that the legacy, I suppose, of the original Section 106 when it was in its previous use still remains, and so this application seeks to effectively tidy that part up. The reason why it has come before Planning Committee is that because the effect of the variation is that effectively there is no requirement for the 106 in its entirety, so it would mean effectively discharging the 106 in its entirety. Officers don't actually have delegation for that function. So had it been a simple variation, I think it would have just simply been dealt with in that way, but it is simply the fact that it requires its removal in its entirety. So the recommendation put forward, Chair, is on page 302, section 2, which is that the application to discharge the legal agreement in its entirety is approved.
Right, thank you. Any questions to officers on this? Is there any debate on this? I will move it for approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Tomlin. Moved and seconded for approval. Councillor Court.
For approval.
Councillor Saunders.
For.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For.
Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormick.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
Councillor Tomlin. Thank you.
For. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, that is approved. Officers?
That's 10 for the recommendation.
And any other comment, Mike?
No, thank you, Chair. That's approved that the legal agreement can be discharged in its entirety. Thank you, Chair.
All right, I can move on to agenda item number 7. I have a speaker for this. And this is the removal of section 52 obligations. Now, do I have Mrs. Stevens?
Hello.
Hello, Mrs. Stevens.
Hello.
Hello. Is that Mrs.
Hello?
Stevens?
Yes.
Mrs. Stevens, if you could just sit tight, I'm going to get the officers to present this report, and I'll call you to speak in a few minutes. When I do, you will have 2 minutes to address the committee.
Okay.
Officers, would you like to present this, Mike?
Thank you, Chair.
Philip, yeah.
Yes, hi there. So yes, agenda item number 7 is for members to consider the discharge of the deed of variation of the original planning application, which was a Section 52 obligation. Now, Section 52 obligation was a precursor to what is now Section 106. Yes, it's just that Section 52 was predated the 106, and this application seeks to discharge the Section 52 agreement so that the farm can be split amongst the original applicants' children, so that Peak House Farm, which is lived in by one of the applicant's sons, can be sold off and disposed of separately from the remainder of the site, which is with another one of the applicant's sons. So it's just to allow the passing, if you like, of the applicant's land over to his sons, and this is just to clarify matters with regards to Peak House Farm and how that will operate. It's recommended that the agreement be discharged, and as set out in the officer's report, Appendix A, the reason of justification for that is in place there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Stevens, you have 2 minutes to address the committee.
Hello.
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 Hello, Mrs. Stevens. Can you hear me?
No.
You cannot. We can hear you, and you have 2 minutes to address the committee.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry this is so late for everybody. I just wanted to clarify one point that Mr. Philip made, that we actually don't want to sell. We just want to be able to do my father-in-law's wishes, which were that we would live in one house and his son, who subsequently has died now, his grandson, would live in the other, and we would have half the land each, which as it stands is impossible to do. And we have 2 sons of our own who are desperate to be farmers, but we can't, because we don't own this as such, we cannot get investment. We need to build the farm up to provide an income for 2 more members. My 85-year, nearly 86-year-old mother-in-law has been left with all this, and she's got lots of health issues, and her wish is that she would be able to pass it on to both of us, and so that is our most important reason why we would wish this to be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Committee, if she can hear you, do you have any questions for Mr. Stevens? No, thank you, Mrs. Stevens.
Okay, thank you.
That's very kind of you to come along. Bye-bye. Right, questions to officers? No. Any debate? I move from the chair for approval. It is an approval. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCormack, thank you. Moved and seconded for approval as per the recommendation on page 323
Yes.
of the.
This is the last one. You can go.
I'm sorry. No, it's all right. Right, Councillor Court.
For.
Councillor Saunders.
Yes, for.
Councillor Goodison.
For.
Councillor George.
For approval.
Frankham. Councillor Frankham.
For.
Councillor Grant.
For.
Councillor McCormack.
For.
Councillor Bound.
For.
Councillor Potter.
For.
And Councillor Tomlin.
For.
That's approved, officers.
That was 10 for the recommendation.
10 for the recommendation. And Philip, do you want to wind it up?
Thank you, Chair. So the application to discharge the Section 52 agreement has been approved. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, committee. Well, we only needed 7 minutes past the 9:30, but we had to do it anyway. And we're back on the 23rd of September. And you'll be hearing from me about that and the officers in the next week or so. Thank you very much. And I bid you a very good night. Councillor Frankham, you sent me a text earlier on, and one of the reasons